Hey guys, tonight we're walking through the crackling hush of colonial Philadelphia, back when the streets smelled like damp wood and hot bread, and the night was lit only by a candle, fire, and whatever was currently burning on accident. You wander past houses built too close together, their eaves whispering secrets to each other across narrow alleys, while chimney smoke curls upward like the city's sleepy exhale. The world feels wrapped in wood, plank walls, cedar beams, pine floors. Lovely, also incredibly flammable. And no one here seems particularly bothered. You can hear a baby wail from an upstairs window, a dog bark somewhere off to the left, and a dull clang of someone extinguishing a cooking fire with a bucket that once held beer. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I mean it, no pressure. I'd rather have a handful of fellow insomniacs than a sea of scrollers. Also, feel free to tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. There's something sweet about knowing you're dozing in Malaysia while someone else is baking bread at 4 a.m. in Saskatchewan. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle down Market Street in shoes that aren't quite broken in, brushing shoulders with other early risers hauling fish, bricks, or yesterday's gossip. The year is somewhere around 1730, and fire is simply how things get done. Want heat? Fire. Want food? Fire. Need to see the room? Fire again. Everything flickers, everything smokes. It's all extremely charming until someone sneezes on a lamp oil wick, and the whole block becomes a cautionary tale. Houses in Philadelphia at this time are lovely, in a handmade sort of way. Timbered bones, thatched or shingled rooftops, walls daubed in whitewash that flakes like sunburned paint. They're close enough together that if one catches fire, you've got maybe 10 minutes before it becomes a group activity. The wood is dry because summers are hot and winters are heated by hearths that glow red and spit sparks like gossipy old women. You pass a cooper's shop. He's just finishing a barrel. You wave. He doesn't wave back because he's busy cursing at a stubborn hoop, but you feel the connection. Across the way, a candle maker's stall smells of hot wax and regret. You peek in and see an apprentice with soot on his face, pouring tallow into little molds, distracted just long enough to spill a bit on the flame. A hiss, a puff, a lesson learned, perhaps. The streets were paved in cobble but patched with dirt, and fire can travel faster than most carts. You notice a pile of ash against the side of a bakery, just a pile now, but once it was likely a cart, or perhaps a crate of flour that got too close to a curious lantern. No one seems too alarmed. These things happen. Now and then you pass water barrels stationed at the corners, open, stagnant, filled with rainwater or unlucky insects. They're meant for emergencies, but mostly they're ignored until someone knocks one over chasing a chicken. There's no real fire department yet, no centralized alert system. If something blazes, you yell, run for help, and hope someone has a bucket nearby who also likes your house. The most popular firefighting tool, leather buckets, soft, cracked, and easily misplaced. Everyone owns one, more or less. Somewhat labeled with initials, but many are swapped or borrowed. It's not unusual to see someone tossing their cousin's bucket into the Delaware River by mistake and apologizing 2 weeks later with a small pie. As the morning air warms, you notice the chimneys begin to breathe. Thatched roofs sigh with the exhalation of burning logs. The whole city is gently toasting itself from hearth to oven, and you start to realize just how precarious it all feels. There are no smoke detectors, there are no fireproof materials, there's just hope, good behavior, and the occasional prayer whispered toward the stovepipe. Historians still argue whether the risk of fire in cities like Philadelphia was truly underestimated or simply accepted as part of colonial life. an ever-present threat like rain or taxes. You'd think people would have been more proactive, but frankly, when you've got a market to run, pigs to wrangle, and 10 children to explain math to, organizing bucket brigades doesn't rise to the top of the list. Still, the seeds of concern are there. Notices occasionally appear in the paper, warnings about chimney sweeping, tales of fires in Boston or Charleston, little parables about what happens when you store lamp oil too close to your hay, but mostly it's just part of the background hum until it isn't. Until the wind blows wrong, the cinders fly, and a quiet Tuesday morning turns into blackened timber and smoldering laundry. You stop beside a tavern and lean against the cool brick, watching as someone throws open shutters and fans smoke out of the kitchen with a broom. A normal day. Another near miss, you sip imaginary cider and consider how long this city can keep tempting fate. Somewhere, not far from here, a man with curious eyes and a very sharp pen is also watching. His name is Ben, and he's about to become very interested in how to stop this whole place from burning down. But that's tomorrow. For now, the city breathes fire, quietly, like a cat sleeping too close to a candle. You catch sight of him from the corner of your eye, a blur of elbows and ambition darting through the cobbled streets like a quill come to life. Young Ben Franklin, patron slightly askew, hair in disarray and ink smudged across one cheek, zigzags past a vegetable cart, dodges a puddle with acrobatic flair, and pauses only long enough to make a small, thoughtful grunt at a chimney that's coughing smoke with more gusto than precision. Then he's off again, muttering to himself, pocketing observations like someone collecting unusually shaped stones. He's barely in his teens, not yet a statesman, philosopher, or inventor of bifocals and polite thunder advice, just a restless, scribble-happy apprentice printer who treats every crooked beam, broken window, or lazy spark as a problem begging to be solved. You follow him for a bit, easier said than done. He walks like his shoes owe him money. Around him, Philadelphia doesn't seem to notice. It's busy being Philadelphia. Half mud, half promise. Merchants argue about crates, laundry flaps from clotheslines like flags of minor nations, and the scent of fish competes gamely with the sharper tang of coal smoke. But Ben notices everything. The way the tavern's kitchen door won't shut fully, the pile of dry thatch stacked worryingly close to a chimney, the wax-dripped candlestick sitting just a little too smugly on a sagging window ledge. He pauses outside a bakery, nose twitching. The bread smells excellent. The firebox, however, is missing a few bricks, and the embers underneath are radiating heat like they've got something to prove. He doesn't say anything, just files it away under things that will probably explode next week, and moves on. In his pocket, a folded scrap of parchment, half diary, half blueprint, half warning list. It's filled with little sketches of rooftops, notes on wind direction, doodles of buckets, and a very crude idea for some kind of mobile water wagon that looks suspiciously like a giant tortoise. He's not quite sure what it means yet, but the ideas are bubbling. Ben's curiosity isn't quiet. It clatters, it scratches at surfaces, it interrupts dinner with questions about heat dispersal and airflow. You can almost hear his older brother's exhausted sighs echoing through the print shop where Ben works, surrounded by the smell of ink and the gentle thump of type being set. Historians agree Franklin's early printing days were foundational, not just for his career, but for how he saw the world. Everything was a puzzle to be solved with information. Everything could be improved with enough observation, testing, and maybe a polite essay signed silence no good. And fire especially fascinated him. It was useful, dangerous, mesmerizing, too useful to ignore, too risky to leave to chance. One story goes that young Ben got into trouble more than once for suggesting improvements to the family stove, not because they didn't work, but because no one asked him to. Another claims he tried to measure how fast candles burned using string, nails, and an egg timer, which sounds suspiciously advanced for someone who still got ink on his ear while setting type. But whether he's sweeping the shop floor or delivering pamphlets to the mayor's office, Ben's always watching, always calculating. You follow him as he ducks into a narrow lane behind the print house. The alley is shaded, damp, filled with moss and mystery, and behind one shuttered window you can hear the snoring of a man who's left a lamp burning too close to a curtain. Ben frowns, scribbles, moves on. He doesn't yet have a plan. He doesn't yet know that one day he'll help organize Philadelphia's first true fire company. Right now he's just a boy who can't stop noticing things. A door left ajar during a storm, a dog curled up beside a hearth too large for the room, a crowd gathering to gawk at a smoking rooftop instead of grabbing a bucket. Historians still debate just how much of Franklin's youthful brilliance was innate and how much came from this relentless curiosity, this obsession with paying attention. But there's no argument that his ability to blend practicality with imagination would eventually lead him to ask the question no one else had bothered to: what if we were prepared? He pauses. Ben stops in the street, staring up at a row of second-floor chimneys. One is clean, one is cracked, one is tilting in a way that feels deeply unwise. He tilts his head. Then, slowly, he sketches the layout of the roofs in the air with his finger, tracing how a fire could leap from one to the next. He nods to himself, turns around, and walks directly into a horse cart. It's fine, the horse doesn't mind. Ben apologizes to both the cart and the horse, then continues on, already deep in thought about where a fire would break out next, and whether he could convince his brother to publish a short pamphlet titled On the Prevention of Household Catastrophes by Slightly Less Laziness. As the sun begins to lower, casting the brick walls in shades of toasted apricot, Ben disappears around a corner, likely heading back to the print shop, or to a debate, or to take apart a kettle just to see how it works. And you stand for a moment longer, feeling the city breathe its smoky, hopeful breath, and knowing that somewhere in its tangled alleys, a teenage boy with a slightly singed cuff is already dreaming of a better way to fight fire. You jolted awake, not by an alarm of course, because it's the early 1700s and no such thing exists, but by a rising clamor of shouting voices, clattering pails, and the unmistakable smell of something that was once a house but now smells a lot like roasted walnut and singed linen. You follow the noise, feet slapping against uneven cobblestones, until you reach a small, smoke-fringed street where chaos is doing a full performance. Loud, unscripted, and extremely flammable. The fire has taken hold of the top floor of a small home, tucked between a butcher's shop and a cobbler's bench. A gout of smoke coughs out of the upper window like it's late for a meeting, and someone downstairs is shrieking about lace curtains and a cousin's violin. A pot of soup has been flung into the dirt, presumably in the hope that beef broth contains extinguishing powers. And then comes the bucket brigade. He's not sure whether to applaud or weep. A line of neighbors, some in nightgowns, some in half-buttoned breeches, has formed between a nearby well and the burning home. Buckets pass from hand to hand, sloshing and splashing, and occasionally arriving at the fire with just enough water left to give it a polite rinse. Someone drops a pail, another slips on the mud. A third person panics and throws their only bucket into the flames. It's not their fault, they're trying. That's the beauty and tragedy of it. This system, if you can call it that, was the best they had. Everyone was expected to keep their own leather bucket, ideally hanging near the front door for quick access. In theory, when a fire broke out, you grabbed yours and joined the nearest line. In practice, most buckets were missing, cracked, or currently being used to brine pickles. You watch as someone tries to use a flat cooking pan instead, flinging water upward like they're flipping an invisible pancake. The fire is unimpressed. It's not just the buckets, though, it's the complete lack of coordination. No one's in charge. There are no assignments, no practiced roles. It's just a swirl of well-meaning chaos. People shout contradictory orders. One man yells to focus on the roof while another insists on soaking the floorboards. A third is just shouting his wife's name over and over, possibly because he's realized their insurance plan is hope it rains. The fire crackles with theatrical glee. Wooden walls sigh. A roof tile falls. Someone faints dramatically. A small crowd has gathered just to watch. Because in a world with no cinema, a burning building is a grim form of entertainment. You shuffle to the side as a boy runs past carrying a single damp rag, an heroic expression. Historians still debate whether early bucket brigades were genuinely effective or more of a performative community effort, a way to feel helpful in the face of inevitable collapse. The record suggests that most fires either burned themselves out or were halted by sheer luck, wind direction, distance from other structures, or the fact that it rained at just the right moment. You step aside as two men run past carrying a door, which they proceed to throw at the fire. It's unclear whether this is a tactic or just adrenaline-fueled improvisation. The crowd cheers anyway. Amid all this, you spot someone trying to organize things. A young woman with sleeves rolled high, voice sharp, directing traffic like a general. Water to the left, people to the right. No, not that right. For a moment, you glimpse the future. A world where fires are met with calm coordination, training, and maybe even uniforms? But not yet. For now, everything depends on neighbors, on leather buckets, on shouting the word fire louder than your neighbor's snores. No central bell rings to alert the whole town. No wagons arrive stocked with hoses and ladders. If you're lucky, the church bells might be rung by a passing priest who's nimble with rope. But usually the first 10 minutes are just yelling and flinging water at wood that is, by all architectural logic, extremely tired of being dry. You watch as someone, no one's sure who, manages to get a proper bucket of water into the heart of the flames. There's a hiss, a puff, and a brief moment of silence. Hope lifts its head. Then the fire finds the pile of wool stored in the corner and sighs loudly, roaring upward like a dragon that's just remembered its favorite sport. Stay still. The people don't quit. They keep passing buckets. They keep soaking blankets. Someone tries to smother a spark with a flour sack, which ends in an explosive poof and the scent of toasted pastry. A minor miracle occurs when one of the side walls collapses outward rather than inward, sparing the cobbler's shop next door. Someone takes this as a divine sign. Someone else takes it as a cue to faint again. Eventually, the fire begins to die, whether it's the water, the effort, the lack of fuel, or simple exhaustion on all sides, no one knows, but it quiets, it smolders. A chair rises, ragged but sincere. They did it. Mostly, the top floor is gone, the stairs are probably soup, and someone's goat looks deeply traumatized, but the building stands, kind of. And you're left there, standing amid wet footprints, singed rags, and the smell of smoke and determination. Your shoes are soaked, your shirt is damp, your eyebrows feel crispy. You wonder how many more fires this city can survive with only leather buckets and a dream. Ben Franklin, watching from a distance, just nods thoughtfully. He's not yet famous, not yet important, but this soggy belay of panic has planted a seed. A better way must exist. And Ben, you suspect, already has a few ideas scribbled on the back of a bread wrapper. You lean against a fence post that's still slightly warm from the morning's drama, watching as a small crowd picks its way through the soggy aftermath. It's not just steam rising from the charred timbers, it's pride, smoke, and maybe a little confusion. See, no one asked who paid. No one checked for a plaque. No one said, sorry, your subscription has lapsed and your roof is therefore flammable by choice. Because in this early version of firefighting, the kind Ben Franklin would help shape, there's a curious blend of idealism, practicality, and good old-fashioned neighborly guilt. Yes, technically there's a system, a voluntary one. You sign up, pay your dues, and in return, the fire company agrees to protect your property. You even get a special plaque, a fire mark, nailed to your home like a badge of belonging. It says, I contribute, please don't let me burn. But when the actual flames come calling, that tidy system frays. You see it now as the fire company, tired, wet, soot-streaked, steps away from the house they just saved. No plaque on the wall, no receipt nailed to the door. Just an old couple standing on their porch, blinking gratefully and offering bread that's only slightly overdone. One of the firemen waves them off with a shrug. We're not monsters, he mutters, accepting the bread anyway. This is the paradox of Franklin's model. The Union Fire Company, founded in 1736, was built on volunteerism and civic duty. There were dues, yes. There were rules, officers, and monthly meetings. But the beating heart of the system wasn't a ledger. It was a belief that the safety of one neighbor was tied, sometimes literally, to the safety of the next. Fire doesn't check fire mark. It leaps from roof to roof with no regard for membership fees. So even when a house belonged to a non-subscriber or, more awkwardly, a chronic late payer, the brigade usually helped anyway. Maybe because it was the right thing. Maybe because half the men lived 2 blocks away and didn't fancy their own kitchens catching next. Or maybe, as some historians suggest, it was just hard to walk past your neighbor's burning attic without feeling like a bit of a villain. You trail after the brigade as they head back toward the firehouse, or what passes for it. Not a grand station with red doors and shiny brass. Just a simple shed with buckets, ladders, hooks, and a few logs for sitting. There's no fire engine yet. That will come later. For now, it's all human effort, organized in shifts and recorded with meticulous care. Ben made sure of that. Inside, one of the men pulls out the logbook. Another begins recoiling a hose, well, not a modern hose, but a stitched length of canvas that resembles a very determined bedsheet. A third starts scrubbing soot from a helmet made of leather so stiff it could probably withstand a philosophical debate. These were the tools of duty, of intention. And yet, despite the structure, you hear murmurs. A few grumble that the old couple hasn't paid in months, that their pluck probably blew off in a storm and no one's replaced it, that they always expect help but never show up to the bucket drills. You think the conversation might sour. Then someone chuckles. Well, he says, next time it's your roof, maybe they'll bring the bread. And that's it. The complaint deflates. Someone throws him a damn towel and the moment passes like smoke on a breeze. Historians still argue whether the early fire companies should have enforced their membership model more strictly. Some say it was naive to risk lives and tools for people who didn't contribute. Others argue that the whole point, the Franklin point, was to build something bigger than a transaction. That if fire threatened one, it threatened all. And in a town of narrow lanes, wooden shingles, and neighbors who regularly borrowed your sugar, not helping was almost unthinkable. You sit for a while, watching as boots are dried, tools are counted, and one man sketches out a rough map of the fire site. Not to report it, but to remember it. What caught first? How did the wind move? How long did it take for help to arrive? Franklin believed in data, in observation, in the idea that everything could be improved, if not immediately, then over time through practice, record keeping, and spirited debate fueled by tea and maybe just a little too much sherry. He wanted the fire company to learn from every blaze, to refine their craft, to anticipate what came next. And still, he knew that all of it depended on people showing up, whether they paid or not. You hear laughter now, low and tired but real. Someone jokes about putting a fine on the man who threw a chicken at the fire. Another suggests that maybe chickens are flammable and it was a valid tactic. There's lightness here, earned by sweat and smoke and the quiet knowledge that, for all its flaws, this little system worked. Not perfectly, but better than nothing. And so the day ends, not with a bill, but with a loaf of overcooked bread passed around and a vague promise to remind the old couple to please, for the love of ashes, attend the next meeting. You stretch, brush soot from your sleeve and realize that in a city without fire hydrants or formal fire departments, what saved people wasn't money or plaques. It was participation. It was being known. It was the mutual agreement that when the flames came, you'd be there, regardless of dues, subscriptions, or whether someone had returned your borrowed candlestick. The next time the shouting starts, you notice something different. It's still chaos, because fire, by its very nature, prefers a dramatic entrance. But there's a new sound slicing through the din, not just the slosh of buckets or the frantic patter of bare feet on cobblestone. This time, it's the leathery rasp of something heavy being uncoiled like a particularly stubborn snake. You follow the noise down a side alley where, to your mild surprise, the fire company is wrangling what looks like a very long, very determined belt. But it's not a belt, it's a hose. A leather hose. And it is about to change everything. Up until now, bucket brigades have been the norm. Functional, occasionally heroic, always a bit soggy. But someone, likely Franklin's friend over in Boston, had the curious and slightly dangerous idea to stitch together long strips of leather, seal the seams with animal fat, and then run water through it rather than alongside it. A revolutionary concept that, while genius, came with a few downsides. Chief among them, leather hoses are heavy, leak like philosophical arguments, and absorb water like they're trying to become soup. But they worked. You watch as two men shoulder the hose, shouting instructions like captains of a very floppy ship. One grips the nozzle, a gleaming brass contraption shaped like a goose's beak, while the other struggles to keep the coils from kinking. Behind them, a hand-pumped engine the size of a large goat wheezes into action, sucking water from the well and sending it down the hose in pulses. It's not exactly a roaring torrent, more like a firm trickle, but the water reaches the fire now, directly. No more passing buckets, no more waiting for Harold to fumble his pail and spill half the reservoirs onto his feet. This is flow, this is direction, this is, if you squint, progress. The flames don't vanish immediately, of course. Fires rarely respect technology, but you can see the shift in the firefighters' faces. They're not just reacting, they're controlling, steering the water, sweeping it across beams, targeting the hottest parts like surgeons of steam. Your shoes are soaked again. Leather hoses leak, remember? Especially when they've been patched with whatever was handy. Bits of sailcloth, scraps of parchment, once even a piece of someone's old vest. You step carefully, watching as water pools along the street and mixes with ash to form a kind of civic pudding. Still no one's complaining, because the hose has promise. It means you can draw water from a source farther away. It means you don't need 30 people with buckets. You can do it with 10 if they're strong and stubborn. It means for the first time you can aim. Historians still argue whether the adoption of leather hoses truly marked a revolution or just a soggy evolution. Some say it was too leaky, too cumbersome, too much work for too little payoff. Others insist that it was the first true step toward the fire departments we know today. a way to transform well-meaning chaos into strategy. Franklin, for his part, would have loved the debate. He wasn't an inventor of the hose, but he admired any invention that made people safer and lives a little less flammable. He once wrote that an ounce of prevention was worth a pound of cure, and leather hoses, awkward as they were, felt like both. You lean against a nearby lamppost, or what passes for one in colonial Philadelphia, and listen to the sounds of the hose brigade, the grunt of shoulders underweight, the hiss of escaping steam, the muttered curses as someone's boot fills with water again. It's clumsy, imperfect, and absolutely glorious. There's even a kind of ballet to it. One man pumps the engine in a rhythmic bounce. Two others hold the hose steady. The nozzle swings like a conductor's baton, directing a stream of water that arcs and falls in a shimmering arc. A child watches from a windowsill, mouth open, clearly deciding whether this is terrifying or the best thing they've ever seen. And beneath it all, teamwork. No longer just individuals flinging water and prayers. This is coordination. It's sweaty, muddy, and not at all graceful, but it's working. The fire dies faster this time. The damage is contained. The neighboring buildings, though damp and probably steaming like overcooked dumplings, remain intact. You step back as the firemen begin their weighing down. The hose is heavy now, soaked and stubborn, but it's coiled with something close to reverence. Tools are checked. Boots are emptied. Someone wrings out a hat. Someone else collapses on a barrel and starts describing in vivid detail how they almost slipped on a cabbage. Because one man, older and limping slightly, picks up the hose nozzle and examines it like it's a relic. "We're getting better," he murmurs, mostly to himself. You believe him, because today's fire didn't spread. Today's fire wasn't a disaster, it was handled. You glance at the fire mark on the nearby wall, then at the half-burnt door someone's already planning to reuse. The street smells like steam and hope. And somewhere, probably with his quill tucked behind his ear and his spectacles low on his nose, Franklin is already writing about this. About leather hoses, about change, about what might happen if a city kept choosing organization over panic and science over superstition. And maybe, just maybe about what comes next. Metal hoses, steam engines, sprinklers. The future, as always, begins in soggy shoes. You're warming your hands near a small hearth in a modest Philadelphia parlor, watching a pot of something vaguely stew-like bubble with determined slowness. The fire dances politely, controlled, efficient, almost smug. And that's because it isn't in a traditional fireplace. It's inside a gleaming cast iron contraption with a name as no nonsense as the man who designed it, the Franklin stove. It doesn't look like much at first. A bit squat, a little boxy, not something you'd call elegant unless your definition of elegance includes heat retention and reduced smoke inhalation. But this stove is a revolution in cast iron and civic practicality. And it joins the firefighting effort not by dousing flames, but by helping to prevent them altogether. You crouch lower, peering into the open mouth of the thing. The logs sit angled, not flat. Air flows differently here, creating a hotter burn with less fuel. There's a rear baffle, a kind of iron tongue that guides smoke out the back instead of letting it rise directly upward like it does in traditional fireplaces, which incidentally makes it much harder for your ceiling to catch fire just because you tried to make soup. Ben Franklin, ever the tinker with a civic conscience, didn't invent stoves, but he redesigned them with a kind of gentle genius. His goal? A warmer, safer home. And perhaps a world where chimneys didn't spend so much time on fire. You run your finger along the edge of the stove. It's warm, but not dangerously so. In older homes, fireplaces were practically open pits fire leapt freely, licking at walls, rattling flues, and sometimes deciding, without warning, that your curtains looked a bit too relaxed. The Franklin stove, by contrast, contains its ambition. It burns hotter, which means it burns cleaner. Less smoke in the room, fewer sparks leaping for the drapes. And best of all, it actually heats the room, not just the ceiling. You see, not everyone trusts it. And you overhear a neighbor grumble that newfangled inventions always seem like a good idea until someone forgets to clean the vent and the whole place fills with smoke like a bar fight in a barn. That's fair. Because while Franklin's stove was safer, it wasn't foolproof. The instructions, if followed, worked beautifully. But if misused, you could easily turn your cozy parlor into a slow-cooking oven for your boots and self-esteem. Historians still argue whether the Franklin stove was widely adopted in its original form. Many modified it, others took pieces of the idea and grafted them onto older hearths. But what's certain is this: the stove marked a turning point. It proved that fire could be made safer before it broke loose. That technology wasn't just about response, it was about prevention. You settle into a nearby chair, enjoying the way the stove's heat settles low in your bones. It's not the flashiest invention in Ben's resume, but it might be one of the most quietly important. After all, how many fires were avoided because a house didn't need a roaring blaze to stay warm? How many families slept easier knowing the flames were better contained, the smoke more obedient? And it wasn't just a technical achievement, it was a social one. Franklin didn't patent the stove, he released the design for free, encouraging others to build and improve on it. As we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, he wrote, we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by any invention of ours. That's not just a sentiment, it's a whole philosophy of heat. You sip something hot, a mug of cider maybe, and glance out the window. Across the street, you see another stove being installed. Two men hefted awkwardly through a doorway, banging their shins and muttering. One drops his end and curses, the other calls him something creative involving turnips. But they're laughing, because this isn't just a stove, it's security. Somewhere upstairs, a child sneezes, someone stirs in a rocking chair. The city is slowly adopting this curious little box of metal, and in doing so, it's becoming just a bit more fireproof. Just a bit wiser. Your guide, always with the dramatic timing, appears beside you holding a folded pamphlet, the original advertisement for the stove. It describes a saving of fuel, a reduction in chimney sweeps, and with great optimism, a gentle cheerfulness of air. You wonder if Franklin wrote that bit? Probably. He had a talent for mixing earnestness with just enough charm to make you forget he was trying to sell you something. And while the stove didn't stop fires entirely, it marked a shift. The city wasn't just reacting anymore, it was preparing, fortifying, learning. You let your eyes rest on the stove one more time, admiring the way its iron sides glow with quiet purpose. This wasn't a flashy invention, no gears, no lightning, no dramatic newspaper headlines, just warmth, stability, and fewer chimneys collapsing into ash and scandal. Not everything that saves a city wears a uniform or clangs a bell. Sometimes it arrives as a box of iron and a free pamphlet, and the quiet suggestion that maybe, just maybe, you could burn a little smarter. It's summer now, and the city smells like smoke, but not the worrying kind, at least not yet. It smells like roasted chestnuts and scorched sausage, like spent powder and bravado. It's a holiday, not the Independence Day. This is well before 1776, but something very close in spirit. A noisy, candlelit, firecracker-flinging colonial celebration, complete with patriotic speeches, poorly tuned fiddles, and more open flames than common sense. You'll walk the cobbled harbour road with a meat pie in one hand and a growing sense of unease in the other. Every other doorway has a lantern, every cart is loaded with barrels, the ships bobbing in the water are decked out in bunting, and far too many tar-lined torches for anyone's long-term safety. Children with smudged cheeks run past holding lit sparklers made from rolled parchment and wishful thinking. This is what you might call a very flammable evening. Fireworks, still a novelty in the colonies, have arrived via generous smugglers and curious chemists. Franklin himself is rumored to have imported some from England, not for show, of course, but to study the chemistry. Or maybe because they look pretty. He never admitted it outright. But here they are, lighting up the sky in bright oranges and ghostly blues, trailing sparks over a harbor lined with ships full of pitch, rum, and highly flammable optimism. You take a step back as one firework misfires, zipping sideways into a stack of crates near a docked schooner. There's a brief silence, those long, heavy seconds when everyone collectively wonders if it'll go out or go boom. A moment later, flames lick up the side of the wood. Panic arrives on schedule, but so do the firemen. You see them sprinting in, red-faced and already soaked with sweat. Their bucket lines form with practiced choreography, leather hoses dragging behind like sleepy snakes. Some carry wet blankets, others metal hooks used to pull down burning timbers. They're fast. Too fast, really, for a volunteer crew. But that's the thing about Franklin's fire companies. While they were made of volunteers, they trained like they were being paid in barrels of ale and community pride. Someone shouts for the engine, another curses the holiday itself, and amidst the chaos, a child's voice cuts through. It's beautiful. You look up. Fireworks are still going off. Overhead, behind you, beside you. The show doesn't stop just because half the harbor's threatening to light itself on historical fire. Franklin, you suspect, is not present for this event. But if he were, you imagine he'd be scribbling notes with one hand while dousing flames with the other. Or maybe giving a speech mid-blaze about the responsibilities of celebration and the flammability of merriment. Historians still argue whether this particular holiday, often referred to as the King's Thanks or the Civic Jubilee, depending on the year, was the inspiration for later 4th of July celebrations. What's certain is that it had all the right ingredients: fireworks, speeches, roasted animals on spits, and the occasional unfortunate cannon incident. You help pass a bucket down the line, your arms aching in the sticky heat. The fire by the dock is mostly out now, smothered before it could spread to the ship's tar-streaked hull. You breathe in deeply and immediately regret it. Ash and pork grease don't mix well. Someone behind you laughs and says, "Not the worst one we've had." You don't ask about the worst one. The firemen are staying longer tonight. Extra shifts, extra eyes. They know too well what happens when merriment forgets moderation. You see them stationed like lanterns themselves, posted by doorways near cooking pits beside the docks. Their presence is both comforting and a little sad, like chaperones at a party they'd rather be enjoying. One firefighter with a soot-streaked cheek and a half-melted boot plops down beside you on a barrel. Next year, he says, "No fireworks, just poetry." He takes a swig of something brown from a flask shaped like a fish. "Or knitting." You nod solemnly, then nearly jump out of your skin as another firework explodes directly overhead with the subtlety of a cannonball made of glitter. And yet, there's joy here. Real joy. People cheering, families gathering, neighbors sharing food, and even the firefighters smiling, if wearily. Because Despite the risk, this city lives. It celebrates, even in its own smoky way. And Franklin's ideas of preparation, of shared responsibility, of community watchfulness are baked right into it. Make your way toward the square, where someone has built a massive bonfire. Not a small one, not a reasonable one, a bonfire that looks like it was built to summon a sun god. But it's fenced off, watched over by a ring of volunteers and at least 3 bored-looking goats who may or may not be fireproof. The Franklin stove, safe and contained, is nowhere to be seen tonight. This is the untamed version of fire, the celebratory kind. And yet, somehow, it's not as threatening as it used to be, because now there are plans, people know what to do. The city isn't fireproof, but it's fire aware. You sit cider, your second or third, and watch as a group of children run circles around a sparkler nailed into a fence post. Someone's uncle starts playing a fiddle that drifts slowly out of tune. Someone else is roasting corn directly in the bonfire flames, which is either brave or very foolish. You spot a fireman sigh and step in with a wet cloth before it gets out of hand. The harbor glows, the danger passes, the songs begin. You stretch your legs, feeling the warm cobblestones beneath you and the cooler night settling over your shoulders like a borrowed cloak. The celebration continues, but so does the vigilance. You exhale content. Maybe next year they really will try the poetry idea. You're standing on the edge of a wide, muddy Philadelphia street just after sunrise, sipping something that's probably coffee but tastes suspiciously like overboiled barley water. The air smells of damp bricks, burnt toast, and a faint tension that can only mean one thing. A fire brigade competition is about to begin. And no, you didn't accidentally wander into a sports match, although judging by the sheer number of spectators already lining the curb, you could be forgiven for thinking so. The fire clubs of Philadelphia are here in force, uniformed, confident, and slightly grumpy from lack of sleep. There's the Union Fire Company, of course, Franklin's original creation, easily spotted by their somber navy waistcoats and boots that have seen one too many chimney collapses. Then there's the Hand in Hand Fire Club, who seem to have coordinated saffron-colored neck scarves that clash just enough with their russet jackets to be memorable. And over there, that's the Fellowship Company. They don't believe in uniforms. They just show up in whatever they were wearing at breakfast and still somehow manage to look like they invented firefighting itself. Today's friendly competition is simple. Who can haul their engine the fastest across Market Street, deploy their hose the quickest, and soak a predetermined target? A large, slightly terrified stuffed effigy of a house cat propped up on a wooden crate. It's meant to simulate putting out a fire, or perhaps just to amuse onlookers who need a break from the usual buckets and burnt shingles. As the bugle sounds, and just like that, chaos gallops forth. You watch as the various brigades launch into action, hauling their carts with a kind of muscular desperation usually reserved for chasing runaway wagons or turning the last roast goose at a public dinner. Leather boots slip in mud, hose valves clatter open, buckets fly. The crowd cheers, children scream with delight, and one poor volunteer from the Fellowship Company trips spectacularly and rolls into a cabbage cart. Competitions like these weren't just for fun, though they certainly leaned theatrical. They were a public display of readiness, a way to show the city that its defenders could move fast, think smart, and argue with dignity when their boots got stuck in trolley ruts. But with competition came complaints. You strolled toward a group of captains, all of whom seemed to be explaining very politely but very insistently why their team would have won if not for the pothole, or if the other group hadn't unfairly doused their target with pre-soaked rags, or if the judge's cousin didn't happen to be in the Fellowship Company. One man is holding what appears to be a handwritten letter of protest, sealed with a biscuit. And that's the heart of it. Franklin's idea had caught on wildly. Too well, some might say. Dozens of volunteer fire companies sprang up in the years following the Union Fire Company's debut, each with its own constitution, its own rules, and its own very firm belief that they were the fastest, bravest, most civic-minded lads in town. And if those other clubs just so happened to receive fewer dinner invitations to city council gatherings, well, that's coincidence, surely. Historians still argue whether these competitions were effective training or just public spectacle. Some believe the energy spent bickering over hose nozzle sizes might have been better used inspecting chimneys. Others insist the competitions were critical for building morale and community trust. Plus, they were more fun than another sermon about not leaving candles next to hay bales. You take a step back as one fireman, flushed and breathless, hoists a dented silver trophy that looks suspiciously like an upside-down sugar bowl. The crowd erupts in applause. A child throws flower petals. Someone else throws what might have been a dinner roll. Later, you find yourself at the back of a tavern where a group of volunteers from rival clubs are sitting around a table sharing mugs of ale and comparing blisters. One boasts of having single-handedly pulled a fire engine through 3 feet of snow. Another claims to have put out a barn fire with nothing but determination and a very wet scarf. No one really believes these tales, but everyone enjoys them anyway. This is the strange beauty of early fire brigades. They fought each other almost as often as they fought flames. Not with fists, but with pride. Each wanted to be first on the scene. Each wanted to be remembered. And occasionally, when 2 clubs showed up to the same blaze, they'd waste precious minutes deciding who had jurisdiction before remembering that the house was still very much on fire. Your boots crunch in gravel as you head homeward through the late afternoon light. The competitions are over, but the muttered judgments continue. Next time we'll grease the axle. They cheated on the hose coil. That stuffed cat was biased. You smile, knowing full well that tomorrow they'll all be shoulder to shoulder again, facing real danger. Because underneath the showmanship, the sash colors, and the occasional well-meaning sabotage, they're all chasing the same goal. A safer, better city, one less prone to smolder. You pass a chalkboard sign outside the town hall announcing next month's hose drag relay. The drawing features 2 firemen in full sprint, one clearly winning, the other just happy to be included. You chuckle. Somewhere Franklin would be proud, and probably scribbling down ways to improve the scoring system. You're back in Franklin's print shop, the air thick with ink, the press groaning with every crank, and the unmistakable smell of burnt paper somewhere underfoot. A stack of freshly dried pamphlets rests nearby, their titles simple but commanding in that particular Franklin tone. Some modest proposals for preventing your entire street from burning down. Catchy? Maybe not, but popular? Very. You flip through the pages. It's not exactly riveting prose, more like a list of don'ts, arranged with just enough charm and sarcasm to make you feel scolded and entertained all at once. Don't leave candles burning while you nap. Don't dry your laundry over the hearth while also attempting to roast a duck. Don't store pitch, hay, rum and fireworks in the same shed and then blame lightning when it explodes. The most famous version eventually becomes known simply as How Not to Set Philadelphia on Fire. Franklin didn't invent fire safety pamphlets, but he certainly elevated the genre. His guides were printed in the same font as his almanacs, distributed through bakeries, taverns, post offices, and even slipped inside bread deliveries if you asked nicely. And they weren't just dry rules, they were delightfully snarky. One page reads, "If you must read by candlelight, kindly refrain from leaning your powdered wig too close to the flame. The city thanks you in advance." Another warns, "Do not pour whale oil on embers to see what happens. It will happen faster than you expect." You chuckle. The tone walks the line between civic duty and comedic roast, and somehow it works. The guide becomes the talk of the town. Children memorize the rules. Tavern owners recite them aloud after the third round of ale. Even the mayor is spotted quoting line 5. Keep curtains short and your temper shorter when fire visits, during a city council meeting. It's Franklin doing what Franklin does best, fixing a problem with paper, wit, and a startling amount of detail. Because he knew something very few did back then. Most people won't read boring instructions, but they will read a list that makes them laugh and feel just slightly smarter than their neighbor. You imagine him at his desk, spectacles perched on his forehead, scratching quill across parchment while muttering phrases like no soot on silk, and how many ways can you set your own roof on fire before the neighbors notice? The man doesn't stop thinking, even when he's supposed to be thinking about something else, which for Franklin is always. Outside the print shop, you hear the clamor of wagons and horses and a woman shouting about needing 5 more copies for the girls at her sewing circle. Another passerby offers to trade a sack of apples for a guide. Franklin, ever the opportunist, is already adding a small price tag to the next run, half a penny per copy. Proceeds to go toward the fire company's hose repairs and a possible cider barrel for the annual general meeting. Historians still argue whether these guides truly changed behavior or simply made people feel like they were trying, but city records show a dip in chimney fires just months after the first run. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe it's just the power of a well-placed joke about flammable wigs. You fold one of the guides into your coat pocket as you wander the neighborhood. There's something comforting about knowing a city, still mostly made of wood, has a little laminated wisdom floating around. You pass a butcher shop with a guide posted on the door beside a note about sausage specials. A bakery window displays a copy next to its loaves, the ink slightly smudged by buttered fingers. Further down the street, you spot a father reading aloud to his son. Rule 9. If the fire is too big for your bucket, it's too big for your pride, call the company. The boy nods solemnly. You hope he remembers it the next time he's tempted to poke at glowing embers with a broom handle. Franklin's lists evolve over time. Some editions include diagrams, others get little verses. Ashes fall, don't stall, pour water quick, or lose it all. One includes a step-by-step plan for organizing your neighbors in case of a fire, complete with a politely worded suggestion to avoid yelling, "Everything is burning," unless absolutely necessary. You reach the square where a small crowd is gathered around a large bulletin board. There it is again, Franklin's Guide, pinned neatly with 4 brass nails and already annotated by someone in charcoal pencil. One edition reads, "Also don't let Aunt Mabel near the hearth after 2 cups of mead." You smile. Practical advice often starts as rumor. There's something elegant in its simplicity. A list, a voice, a little humor, and suddenly a city that once panicked at every plume of smoke now pauses, thinks, and maybe checks for dry tinder before lighting the lamp. You sit on a bench, guide in hand, the sun low in the sky, casting warm amber light over cobblestones and rooftop chimneys. Someone's cooking onions. Someone else is arguing gently about whether it's the turn of the fellowship or the union to oil the fire engine wheels. And all around, tucked in coat pockets and behind counters, Franklin's little list lives on. Not just ink on paper, but a mindset. A gentle nudge that safety isn't just about rules, it's about community, laughter, and remembering that no matter how clever you think you are, your curtains can still catch fire if you're not paying attention. The printing press slows to a lazy creak, and you drift outside into the street again. where another wave of Benjamin Franklin's ideas is already washing over the city, not with ink this time, but with buckets, bells, and conversation. He's not done, you see. A pamphlet was a start, but Franklin has always believed in following an idea to its next logical and sometimes illogical step. So now, with guides fluttering from door frames and recited from bar stools, he turns his curious gaze to something more ambitious, a fire warning system. You find yourself back at the meeting house of the Union Fire Company. It's a squat brick building with soot-darkened windows and a perpetual smell of damp rope and boiled leather. Inside, Franklin is standing by a long table scattered with sketches, bales, and a rather sad-looking brass triangle that once served as a dinner gong. Around him sit a few dozen volunteers, boots muddy and sleeves rolled. They're here for something new. We need a way to alert the city before its ashes, Franklin says, tapping a paper with the kind of energy that says he's already stayed up too late thinking about this. Thus begins the campaign for the city's first coordinated fire alert network. The plan is simple, in theory, less so in execution. Certain members of each fire company will be designated as watchmen. These brave, perpetually under-caffeinated individuals will patrol the streets at night, eyes peeled for suspicious smoke, open flames, or that familiar shimmer of orange light flickering where it very much shouldn't be. If a fire spotted, they ring a bell, not just any bell, a big one. A bell that will wake the baker, the brewer, and even the notoriously deep-sleeping shoemaker on the corner. You trail one such watchman as he begins his shift. He carries a lantern in one hand and a small iron triangle in the other. His boots crunch softly on frost-bitten cobblestones as he scans windows and alleyways, muttering to himself like a man who's had one too many dreams about chimney sparks. The triangle clinks against his leg with each step, ready to be struck if trouble rises. It's not long before a moment comes. A thin curl of smoke snakes from an attic window near Front Street. The watchman squints, steps closer, and smells the unmistakable scent of smoldering thatch. He raises the triangle and strikes it sharp and fast. The sound cuts through the street like a knife through pudding. From every direction, shutters fly open. Doors creak on their hinges, and from down the alley a volunteer fire company comes running, hose cart rattling like a kettle full of marbles. You step back as the team fans out with practiced clumsiness. One man scaling the fence, another kicking over a barrel in excitement, a third calling for water before realizing his bucket is full of potatoes. Still, they get the job done. The anti-fire dies beneath a wave of wet wool blankets, and one very determined man with a watering can. The home is saved. So's the bakery next door. Later that evening, as you sit by a hearth in a nearby tavern, you overhear three patrons debating the night's alarm. "Too slow," says one. "Too early," grumbles another. "Too loud," says a third, holding a mug with hands still shaking. Historians still argue whether Franklin's neighborhood alarm model truly improved response times or just improved people's nerves. But records show a change, not necessarily fewer fires, but better coordinated efforts to fight them, and fewer disputes about whose turn it was to borrow the town bell. You sip something warm as the fire crackles. A pamphlet rests near the hearth, Franklin's latest edition. It reads, "Upon hearing a bell in the night, remain calm, avoid buckets without bottoms, and wear something." Beneath it, a small sketch of a cat with singed whiskers, and the caption, "He panicked. Don't be like him." Outside, another bell rings. Not a fire this time, just the hour, midnight. The city of Philadelphia exhales into its darker half, and you realize that even in the calm, the system keeps watch. A quiet network of eyes and ears and oddly shaped bells, all seeded by one man's deep unease with burning curtains. You pass a lamplighter on your way home. He's humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like one of Franklin's timekeeping rhymes. He tips his hat and keeps walking, lantern bobbing like a sleepy star. And somewhere, back at the print shop, Franklin is sketching again, this time an idea for a water tower shaped like a turkey. He'll ask about that later. You wake to the sound of a distant bell. Not an alarm, but a soft, hourly chime from the square. The fire hasn't returned, but the rhythm of the city continues to hum with Franklin's inventions. Today, though, he's moved on from bells and pamphlets. Today, he's talking about insurance. Yes, fire insurance. Not exactly a thrilling word, you think, as you trail behind Franklin on a damp morning walk to the offices of the Californian contributionship for the insurance of houses from loss by fire. The name alone takes up the better half of the sign over the door. But Franklin doesn't care about brevity right now. He cares about convincing homeowners that paying a little now might save them a lot later. The streets are muddy, the buildings still mostly wood, and chimneys puff like sleepy dragons. Franklin, as usual, walks fast and talks faster. If everyone chips in, he says, no one is ruined alone. Then he smiles the kind of smile that makes you wonder if he's also thinking about inventing a better tax. Inside the office, the smell of beeswax and smoke lingers. It's a modest space, just a few desks, a single roaring fireplace, and two men hunched over what appears to be a map of the city. The map is marked with dozens of little ink symbols. Each one is a house someone has insured, each one a promise. You watch as a new client walks in, a tailor, nervous, clutching his tri-corner hat like it owes him money. He's here to protect his shop. Franklin greets him, offers tea, and gently walks him through the process. You pay an annual fee based on the size and location of your home. If your house catches fire, the contributionship helps pay for repairs or replacement. It's not guaranteed salvation, but it's better than counting on luck or the questionable generosity of your neighbor who once tried to roast a goose with gunpowder. The tailor signs the ledger with an inky flourish, and then receives a wooden plaque with the symbol of the company, a row of upright hands clasping a flame. It's meant to be affixed to the front of his shop, identifying it as protected. You can almost see the pride in his step as he heads back out into the morning light, plaque in hand, the future just a little less uncertain. You follow Franklin into a back room where larger discussions are underway. A small group of men debate risks. Should homes near the river pay more? What about those with thatched roofs? One man suggests offering discounts to homeowners who store water barrels on their roofs. Another proposes sending inspectors to make sure chimneys aren't full of sparrows and soot. They're figuring it out in real time. No spreadsheets, no underwriters with clipboards, just common sense, ink, and the occasional arguments over whether sugar merchants pose a greater fire risk than candle makers. Historians still debate whether Franklin truly invented the first fire insurance company. Some point to similar efforts in London decades earlier. But what he did do, undeniably, is bring the concept to colonial America and make it function with stunning efficiency. He didn't just sell insurance, he embedded it into a system of prevention. If you wanted coverage, you had to follow safety recommendations. No covered chimney, no payout. You glance at one of the printed guidelines for policyholders, it reads like a bedtime story for anxious homeowners. Keep ladders within reach of the attic. Store flammable goods in sealed barrels, not open crates. Do not argue with your fire company mid-emergency. This one is underlined. Later that week, you watch as the first inspector makes his rounds. He's got a long coat, a notebook, and a face like someone who's smelled too many scorched pies. He knocks gently on doors, asks polite questions, then climbs up on roofs to check shingles. He doesn't say much, but each house he visits is a little safer than before. The city begins to change. Slowly, cautiously, people build smarter, They space homes farther apart. They sweep chimneys more often. Some even stop drying herbs directly over open flames, despite the superior aroma. A neighbor you meet, an elderly widow with 3 cats and a fondness for nutmeg, tells you she's slept better since hanging the contribution chip plaque above her door. It's not just the insurance, she says, handing you a tiny almond cake. It's knowing someone else cares if this place catches fire. You munch the cake thoughtfully, then glance up at the skyline. There are still sparks, still careless boys with flint and dried moss, still kitchens with oil that gets too curious. But the city has something new. A memory, a map, a system. And at the center of it, Franklin, with his perpetual ink-stained sleeves and his eyes already glancing toward the next idea. You suspect it might involve lightning rods, or spectacles, or maybe teaching cats to detect smoke. You exhaled, soothed by the thought that someone, somewhere, is always trying to make things just a little less flammable. By now, you've learned something important. Benjamin Franklin doesn't just invent things, he builds networks of people, of ideas, of buckets and bells and insurance ledgers. And today, you're following him to the coffee house, where another kind of spark is catching. The London coffee house on the corner of Front and Market isn't just where people come to drink bitter brews and argue over which schooner is slowest. It's a hub, a pulse point. It's where merchants meet magistrates, printers chat with midwives, and occasionally a philosopher accidentally sits in spilled ink and starts ranting about metaphysics. You push open the door and the air hits you like a puff of debate. Franklin is already at his usual table, quill tucked behind one ear, half-finished notes in front of him, and a mug of something so strong it might qualify as alchemy. Today's discussion: should every street have a dedicated fire warden? It seems obvious now, but back then no such role formally existed. There were fire companies, yes, but no assigned individuals watching over each neighborhood, making sure that the chimneys were clean, the water barrels full, and the citizens reminded, gently or otherwise, not to stoke their cooking fires with pine shavings and hope. Franklin proposes that each ward in the city select a fire warden. These men, and let's be honest, they're all men in this particular century, would keep tabs on high-risk areas, report safety violations, and work closely with the fire companies. In short, a bridge between private firefighting clubs and public concern. You sip something too bitter to be tea and listen as the idea spreads like a polite blaze. The printer across the table offers to publish a call for wardens. A constable nods, promising to support the enforcement of fines. A baker raises a hand and asks, does this mean I'll finally stop losing half my sleep to neighborly negligence? So when appointments begin, you walk with Franklin as he visits the first official fire warden, a rotund cooper named Elias, who smells of cider and responsibility. Elias leads you through his assigned stretch of the city, pointing out risky chimneys, dry thatch, and one particularly dicey tavern that insists on flaming its punch for effect. He keeps a small notebook in his apron, scribbling observations in shorthand that no one else can quite decode. A week later, Elias's recommendations are posted on the local notice board: 3 homes fined for blocked alleyways, 2 businesses warned about storing barrels too close to heat, 1 sausage stand given a gold star for exceptional placement of sand buckets. You chuckle at that one. The sausage man, whose name is Bert, beams whenever someone mentions it. He's started wearing the star on his apron. But not everyone is thrilled. One wealthy merchant, who shall remain nameless but has very shiny shoes, publicly complains that the wardens are intrusive, inefficient, and overly fond of chimneys. Franklin, hearing this, pens a satirical response under a fake name in the Pennsylvania Gazette. The piece suggests that perhaps the gentleman in question would prefer to live in a nice warm pile of ashes with his shoes intact. Historians still argue whether the fire warden system was truly Franklin's original brainchild or a local adaptation of older European models. Either way, the city adopted it quickly and expanded it enthusiastically. Within months, every ward had at least one appointed fire overseer, and residents found themselves, at long last, remembering to put lids on their cooking pots. You return one evening to the coffee house and find Franklin sketching again, this time not an invention, but a diagram of city blocks. He's talking to the mayor about reorganizing certain neighborhoods so that wells are more accessible and fire breaks are better maintained. It's urban planning, fire edition. Later that night, you pass Elias on his rounds. He doesn't see you, but you hear him murmuring kindly to a cat as he checks behind a chimney. Still too many leaves, Gerald. If you must climb the roof, kindly sweep while you're up there. The system, like most of Franklin's work, doesn't solve everything, but it slows the chaos. It adds structure, and it turns concern into action. That's what you think about as you walk home beneath a sky full of stars and a city finally learning how not to burn itself down. At your door, glance at the fire warden's chalk mark, 2 slashes meaning safe, and exhale. In Philadelphia, the sparks still come, but so do the hands ready to catch them, awakened not by flames, thankfully, but by a peculiar clanging outside your window. It's not quite a bell, not quite a pot, but something metallic and determined. You shuffle out in your slippers to find a group of neighborhood children dragging a mishmash of pans and buckets down the cobblestone street. They've formed what can only be described as a junior fire watch, unsanctioned, untrained, and extremely loud. P. Franklin would be proud, but mildly alarmed. You learn from a nearby vendor that these impromptu fire patrols have popped up ever since the city began hosting monthly safety drills. The idea wasn't Franklin's technically. It was proposed at a town meeting by a widow who lost her bakery chimney to a nesting squirrel and decided never again. The drills are simple. Practice fetching water, unrolling hoses, shouting directions, but only helpful ones, and pretending to save an invisible cat. Franklin, of course, immediately saw the potential for education. He began printing illustrated guides for children. You get your hands on one titled Stop, Drop, and Shout Sensibly. Inside are diagrams of water buckets, notes on safe ladder usage, and a small cartoon of a boy trying to roast a chestnut on an open ledger while the text screams, "No." These educational pamphlets begin showing up in every shop, tavern, and shoemaker's stall in town. There's even a version written in verse, set to the tune of a popular sea shanty. It's objectively terrible, but wildly catchy. You find yourself humming it against your will while brushing your teeth with a stick. Back at Franklin's printing office, things are busier than ever. Apprentices run around with stacks of fire prevention materials, while Franklin himself fiddles with a copper plate meant to depict the correct angle for rooftop water barrels. He mutters something about graphic clarity and then spills ink on his shoes. You help him re-ink the plate and in the process hear him talk about the bigger picture. If the city knows what to do before a fire starts, he says, then half the job is already done. He's not wrong. It's one thing to react. It's another to prepare. And preparation, in Franklin's mind, begins with printed words. Historians still argue whether these early guides qualify as the first public safety manuals in the colonies. Some say they were just glorified flyers. Others insist they laid the groundwork for modern civil defense education. But what's not debated is their effect. Fewer panicked crowds, faster bucket lines, and fewer people yelling contradictory directions during emergencies. You visit one of the drills next week. It's hosted in a wide public square, and the crowd includes toddlers, teenagers, tavern owners, and a man who swears his beard is naturally fireproof. Teams form, buckets are passed, shadows are watched, A volunteer fire is symbolically doused with red rags, and everyone cheers like they've just invented plumbing. You can't help but smile. It's absurd, slightly chaotic, and deeply communal. Everyone is part of the story now. Not just firefighters or inventors or wardens. Even the man selling honey cakes from a wheelbarrow is wearing a red ribbon that says "Fire Aware." Franklin stops by briefly, tipping his hat and nodding approvingly at a boy who correctly identifies the safest window for escaping a second-strain kitchen. "Now that one," he says, "should probably be mayor." You follow him afterward to a quieter corner of the city where he's meeting with a small group of tradesmen. The conversation turns to building materials. Could brick replace wood? Could slate replace thatch? Could people maybe stop storing barrels of fish oil next to their furnaces? There are murmurs of agreement, but also hesitation. Brick is expensive. Thatch is easy. Habits are slow to change. Franklin listens, then suggests a new idea: incentives, reduced fire insurance premiums for those who build with safer materials. It's a small thing, but like most of his ideas, it nudges people forward without shoving. A few months later, you spot a new home being built on the outskirts of town. It's made of brick. The owner smiles when asked why. "My premiums went down," he says, shrugging. "Plus, I like the way it sounds when it rains." That evening, as the sun sinks low and the lamps begin to flicker on, you pass by another fire drill. This one led entirely by women. They formed their own company, unofficial but effective, and their slogan is painted boldly on the side of a wooden cot: "We burn nothing, we save everything." You nod to them, and one woman hands you a biscuit shaped like a bucket. It's surprisingly good. This is the city Franklin is building, not alone, but with everyone else who's tired of seeing their lives go up in smoke. A city where fire is a shared concern and safety is a group project. You feel a strange sense of peace as you walk home, biscuit in hand, knowing that even the noisy children with pans are part of the plan. The next morning greets you with a gentle clang, the city bell tower ringing out the hour in that proud, slightly offbeat way it always does. It's not the most precise way to mark time, but then again, Philadelphia isn't London, and Franklin isn't one for fussy uniformity when a good enough system will do just fine. You head toward the insurance office, which might sound about as thrilling as watching plaster dry, but today something quietly revolutionary is happening, and you, lucky you, are about to witness Benjamin Franklin invent American fire insurance. Not the idea of insurance in general, of course, that's been around for centuries, but the idea that an ordinary person might join a cooperative, pay into a system, and be protected if disaster struck. That's new, especially in a place where wooden houses stand shoulder to shoulder and one candle mishap can turn into a neighborhood barbecue. You arrive at a modest meeting room above a tavern where Franklin and a few civic-minded friends are deep in discussion. On the table lie ledgers, ink pots, and a crumpled list of building addresses someone dropped in the rain. At the head of the table is Franklin, tapping his quill and outlining what will soon be called the Philadelphia Contributionship for the Insurance of Houses from Loss by Fire. Catchy, right? The idea is simple. Assess each building, decide its risk, and charge a fair premium. In return, if a fire destroys your home, the group covers your losses. Unless, of course, you did something ridiculous like store open barrels of gunpowder under your bed. Yes, someone had. You lean over a ledger and see the criteria being drafted: building materials, chimney cleanliness, water access. It's a mix of science, common sense, and the occasional gut feeling. They're especially wary of frame houses, pure timber, no brick, because one spark and they vanish faster than Franklin's patience during a slow printing day. Applicants also have to meet behavioral standards. If you smoke a pipe near hay or let your stove rust out, you're not getting coverage. It's not judgment, it's math. Risky homes mean higher payouts, and Franklin is many things but not a fan of burning money. He proposes a physical marker, a way to identify insured homes, a small lead plaque affixed near the door, stamped with the company's symbol, 4 hands clasping, one from each direction. You help affix one to a brick house near the wharf. The owner beams like he's just joined a secret society. In a way, he has. And here's the strange part. It works. Over the following months, fire incidents in insured homes drop. Not because magic happens, but because people try harder. They sweep chimneys, they store ashes properly, they fix loose shutters that might spark in the wind. Peer pressure, as it turns out, is a powerful fire retardant. Word spreads. Other towns write letters asking for templates, guidance, even permission to start their own branches. Franklin responds with cheerful efficiency, providing printed guidelines, sample policies, and advice like, tell your citizens not to light fireworks inside. Again, someone had. Historians still argue whether this was the first true fire insurance company in the colonies. Some cite earlier mutual aid systems. Others insist Franklin's model was unique because it combined underwriting, inspection, and payout standards into one neat package. Either way, it becomes the gold standard. One afternoon, you accompany an inspector from the contribution ship on a visit. He's a tall man named Tobias who smells faintly of ink and pipe tobacco. You watch as he examines a baker's home, noting the state of the oven, the roof, and the placement of the water barrel. The baker, clearly nervous, offers Tobias a free loaf. Tobias accepts it, but writes roof beam exposed in the margins anyway. Later, Franklin chuckles at this. Flour doesn't put out flames, he says, taking a bite, but it helps with diplomacy. Back at the office, you watch as a payout is approved for a carpenter who lost part of his workshop to a chimney flare. The process is straightforward, the tone respectful, no accusations, no finger pointing, just help. And that's the thing you notice most. The insurance office isn't cold or bureaucratic, it's neighborly, personal. Everyone working there has likely held a bucket during a blaze. Some still do. There's no ivory tower here, just a brick room above a tavern where people pool their fears and turn them into something quietly brave. You walk home that evening along a street where lead plaques gleam in the gaslight. Some houses are modest, others grand, but they're all part of something shared. Not just protection, but trust. A belief that your neighbor's safety is your safety too. And as you tuck in for the night, the soft clink of the bell tower marking the hour, you feel it, the hush that comes from knowing someone's thought this through. That even in a city of wooden houses and stubborn candles, someone decided to plan ahead. The smell of scorched chimney soot greets you at the bakery long before the bread does. It's not alarming, just a reminder that even well-kept hearths have their moods. You linger by the window, watching the baker pat down a smoking log with a metal paddle that's seen better days. Chimneys, he says without turning, are the city's real mischief makers. And he's not wrong. Of all the hazards Franklin catalogued in his many warnings, crooked, clogs, or just plain lazy chimneys were public enemy number 1, which is why you now find yourself volunteering on something called the Chimney Patrol. No, it doesn't come with a badge or a uniform, just a very long, very sooty brush, a lantern, and a list of addresses with known problem chimneys. It's part fire prevention, part neighborhood gossip, and part amateur spelunking. Your patrol leader is a wiry man named Elias who claims he once fell down a flue and saw all of Pennsylvania in reverse. He hands you a cloth wrap for your hair and leads the crew to your first stop, a narrow townhouse with a chimney that leans ever so slightly to the left as if trying to peek at its neighbor's breakfast. Inside, the homeowner greets you with embarrassment and pipe, always a good sign. She admits the flue hasn't been cleaned since the Christmas of the big goose, which no one explains, and everyone quietly respects. Elias sets to work, muttering softly about soot, demons, and creosote conspiracies. You get to try the brush next. The soot rains down in delicate flakes, like foul-smelling confetti, coating your hands, boots, and pride. But it's satisfying work, and more than that, it's meaningful. Each cleaned chimney is one less ember away from a disaster. As you pass other homes on your list, you start noticing patterns. Poorly angled hearths, smoke-blackened ceilings, chimney pots stuffed with bird nests, or once a suspiciously full sock. You jot notes, chat with residents, and even offer tips on positioning mirrors to see up flues without risking neck cramps. Frankly, Natch documents the whole endeavor in the Gazette. He writes an editorial titled "The View from the Flue," praising the chimney patrol for their civic spirit and their toleration of smells best left undescribed. He even sketches a small cartoon of a chimney sweep riding a goose. You decide not to ask. One afternoon, the team was called to the mayor's residence. The chimney is unusually large and used mostly for ceremonial fires. Those symbolic flames politicians love to light and immediately forget about. But lately, it's been smoking even when unlit. The culprit? A blocked flue filled with ceremonial speeches, scraps of paper tossed in after use, forming a tightly packed clump of wet ink and civic ambition. Elias holds it up like a magician unveiling a trick. "Talk really is cheap," he says. He helped design a new flyer for the patrol. It includes tips like tilt your grate, not your fate, and if the smoke can't leave, neither can the fire. Franklin approves it with a grin, then immediately starts drafting a version in French, just in case. Historians still argue whether the chimney patrol was more symbolic than effective. Some suggest it was Franklin's way of shaming homeowners into better habits. Others believe it was an early form of building inspection, cleverly disguised as neighborly goodwill. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between and covered in soot. The city begins holding annual Clean Chimney Week celebrations, complete with parades, bread-shaped like chimneys, and small children dressed as flue brushers. It's charming, ridiculous, and wildly successful. Shopkeepers post signs, "This chimney proudly cleaned," and even taverns offer discounts to customers who show proof of a recent inspection. At one such tavern, you overhear a sailor telling his mate, "If Franklin starts a tooth patrol, I swear I'm leaving the colonies." His mate, without looking up, replies, "Only if your breath doesn't get there first." You return home after a long day of the patrol, hair smelling faintly of pine tar and triumph. Your neighbor waves from across the street and proudly declares, "Two birds flew straight out of mine this morning. I think it's working." And just like that, the idea sticks. Not just the brushes or the inspections, but the principle, small communal acts of responsibility that ripple outward. One clean chimney means one safer street. One educated household means one fewer midnight panic. You lie in bed thinking of all the chimneys you've seen, some grand, some crumbling, some barely able to cough up their own smoke. And yet, each one was a thread in the fabric of this city. A fragile thread, sure, but when tended properly, strong enough to keep the warmth in and the fire where it belongs. Somewhere across town, another team finishes their shift. A last soot cloud curls into the twilight sky. The bells chime softly. The city exhales. And in the quiet hume of your own hearth, cleaned just yesterday, you fall asleep to the safest sound in Philadelphia. Nothing at all. It's nearly dusk when Franklin invites you to one of his favorite meetings, a gathering of the Union Fire Company. He calls it a club, but it's unlike any social club you've known. No powdered wigs or idle gossip here. Just a big wooden table, scattered pamphlets, and a faint smell of sweat ash, and pipe tobacco. The air hums with practical purpose. This is Franklin's other fire invention, Philadelphia's first volunteer fire brigade. Established in 1736, it's a civic experiment disguised as a bunch of tradesmen with sturdy boots and very little patience for bureaucracy. Members include bakers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, and one man who insists he's a professional water barrel curator, though no one quite knows what that means. You're shown to a bench between a tinsmith and a man named Obadiah, who claims to have once extinguished a barn fire with nothing but snow and an impolite hymn. You believe him. Franklin stands to speak, not with pomp, but with that gentle command that makes you sit up straighter without realizing. Tonight's topic, drills. Not the tools, the practice. The Union Fire Company has decided it's time to formalize what to do before a fire breaks out. And so, with chalk and a smirk, Franklin begins sketching the first known community fire drill. It's surprisingly detailed. Bucket relays, rooftop lookouts, hose unwinding, family evacuation routes, and how to keep someone from screaming into a water barrel by mistake. Everyone watches closely, asking questions, suggesting improvements, and volunteering for roles like lantern holder or official door kicker. You scribble notes, realizing this is more than just safety. It's shared rehearsal, community muscle memory. The first draw is scheduled for the following week. You help post notices across town. Practice saves property. Join or kindly move aside. Franklin's phrasing naturally. The day arrives cold and windless. Ideal fire weather, ironically. Volunteers assemble in the square with equipment polished and boots laced. A bell rings. The fire is declared. And suddenly, the quiet square becomes a flurry of planned chaos. Buckets fly, orders ring out, children cheer, and one confused goat decides to join the action. Your job is to document it all, but you can't help grabbing a bucket when one goes tumbling. By the end, the drill site glistens with water, pride, and a bit of misplaced soap someone thought might help. Franklin claps everyone on the back and declares it a complete success, except for the goat, who was given honorary membership and immediately tried to eat the minutes. That night, over warm cider, Franklin explains why drills matter. Habit is a safer friend than hope, he says, polishing soot from his spectacles. A mind prepared is less likely to panic, and panic is fire's best accomplice. Historians still debate how formalized these early drills were. Some claim they were more like pageants than training. Others point to records in Franklin's own gazette that show a genuine effort to standardize procedure. What's clear is that they changed something fundamental. They made safety proactive. Soon other cities copied the model. Boston, New York, even smaller towns across the colonies. Some adapted drills to local quirks, longer alleys, frozen wells, livestock that refused to be helpful. Franklin encourages them all, even publishing a pamphlet titled Preparedness in the Face of Flame, a modest suggestion. It sells modestly. He's too humble to mention the second printing. Back in Philadelphia, drills become seasonal affairs, part preparedness, part neighborhood theater. Families plan picnics around them. Children wear little wooden badges that say, Honorary Fire Watcher. One tavern offers a free drink to anyone who participates in full gear. The city slowly rewires its reflexes. You walk home after a particularly brisk winter drill, breath fogging before you, lanterns flicker in windows, and the scent of ash drifts from chimneys recently cleaned. You pass a home with a water barrel, newly filled, and a ladder leaning just right against the wall. Small changes, but enough And you realize something else. Fire drills weren't just about fire. They were about coordination, trust, belief that a neighbor will lift the other end of the bucket, even in the dark. That when the bell rings, people will run toward the danger, not away. You duck into your doorway and glance back at the street. Still, calm, safe. A city rehearsed. And in that quiet, you hear it. Not bells, not shouting, but the hush of a community that knows what to do. And that knowledge, oddly enough, feels like the warmest blanket of all. It starts with a whisper in the back corner of a tavern, where all good trouble brews. Two men argue over who arrived first at last week's chimney fire, each insisting their brigade had the faster boots, the bigger bucket, and somehow the more heroic dog. You sip your cider and pretend not to listen, but the murmurs spread faster than spilled ale. By morning, the Gazette runs a cheeky piece titled "Who Threw the First Water?" And suddenly, fire companies across Philadelphia are treating it like a title match. Welcome to the Great Fire Brigade rivalry, a contest of speed, efficiency, and ever so polite accusations of bucket theft. You reluctantly drafted into your local brigade's practice runs. What begins as casual competition escalates into full-on drills with timers, audience applause, and one unofficial mascot. A rooster that crows every time a bucket spills. No one trained it, it just showed up. And now it wears a tiny sash. Ben Franklin watches all this unfold with one eyebrow raised and a quill at the ready. He's amused, mostly. Civic pride is a fine thing, he muses, unless it sets the furniture on fire. Still, even he can't deny that the competition has improved response times. Fires are extinguished faster, equipment is better maintained, and the city's general fire safety awareness is way up, if slightly more dramatic. One brigade paints their water barrels with flames, declaring themselves the wet brigade of hell. Another embroiders sashes that say, "First to arrive, last to brag," usually. You help design a new company motto, "Aim for the fire, not the ego." It's politely ignored. Things come to a head when two rival brigades respond to the same chimney fire and spend more time arguing about whose turn it is to hose than actually hosing. The poor homeowner ends up dousing the fire herself using laundry water in what might have been last night's soup. That incident leads to what Franklin Riley calls the soup compromise. A citywide meeting is held in a barn lit by oil lamps and heated by mutual annoyance. Representatives from each brigade gather around a long table, arms crossed and boots muddy. A goat wanders through once. No one moves. After several cups of cider and one spilled inkpot, they reach a resolution: shared jurisdiction. If two brigades arrive, they must coordinate. One leads, one supports, and both agree in advance which team gets the community pie baked in thanks. Pie diplomacy. It works. From then on, fire brigades log their arrival times in a shared ledger. It's not legally binding, but it's socially binding, which in colonial Philadelphia might be stronger. You help deliver the first version to each station, handwritten, leather-bound with Franklin's modest inscription inside, to those who rush in. Historians still argue whether these rivalries helped or hindered. Some said the theatrics distracted from real danger. Others believe the spirit of competition kept the volunteers sharp and the public engaged. As usual, the answer lies somewhere between civic duty and very large egos. You're invited to a fireman's ball, yes is the thing, and discover a world of ceremonial sashes, bucket-shaped cakes, and one dance called the relay. It's awkward, smoky, and surprisingly moving. Couples twirl while others pass a wooden bucket in rhythm to the fiddler. You laugh until your sides ache. Outside, the city glows with lanterns. You walk home past houses with bucket lines neatly stacked by the door, chimneys trimmed and ladders freshly inspected. The rivalry might have started in jest, but it's left a mark, one of pride, of readiness, of odd but effective teamwork. Franklin later reflects on it all in a letter to a friend. The colonies shall one day be many things, free, inventive, lout. But if we are to be anything first, let us be prepared. He ends with a postscript. Also, the rooster has been knighted. So you close your door behind you and set your boots by the hearth, still slightly damp from the practice run. Your sash hangs nearby, still smelling faintly of smoke and pastry. And as you sit by the fire, listening to the quiet creak of your home settling, you think about how rivalry, when harnessed with a little humility and a lot of pie, can become something beautiful. The rooster, by the way, is roosting on your fence. You let him stay. Morning in Philadelphia arrives with a whiff of soot and the gentle clatter of wooden wheels. You're helping unload a shipment from Boston, newly delivered brass-tipped fire hoses, stenciled buckets, and something Franklin is calling a mobile water carriage, which turns out to be a glorified barrel on wheels. It leaks a bit. He calls it version 1. As you roll the barrel down a cobbled lane, Franklin outlines his latest idea, standardizing equipment. It seems obvious now, but back then, every brigade had their own tools, slightly different buckets, oddly threaded nozzles, and hose lengths that ranged from modest to excessive. One company even insisted their hoses worked better when painted blue. They did not. Today's project is to test compatibility between brigades. You gather in a field near the edge of the city, half grass, half mud, with representatives from 6 companies, including the ever-dramatic Wet Brigade of Hell and their rival, the Swift Salamanders. The names alone are worth the effort. Franklin steps forward, adjusting his spectacles. Let's try something revolutionary, he says, raising his hands. Let's agree on the size of a bucket. There is polite laughter, and then somehow a 2-hour debate about whether leather handles should be twisted or flat. You settle under a tree and watch the sky turn pink with exasperation. Eventually consensus wins. They agree on a standard bucket. A comfortable arm's length, sturdy base, and a shape that won't tip easily. Franklin marks one with a tiny UFC symbol, the Union Fire Company seal. From now on, all official fire gear will be made to match it. Or at least, that's the plan. Enforcement relies mostly on peer pressure and Franklin's persistent newsletters. Soon, matching buckets and standardized hose couplings begin to show up at every drill. Fire response becomes smoother, less chaotic, fewer leaks, fewer arguments mid-emergency. The city begins to trust the system. You help build a small inventory hut to house extra equipment carefully labeled with carved wooden signs, nozzle ends, ladder hooks, dry rags. Hopefully, there's even a guest book for visiting brigade members. Someone signs it, the bucket stops here. Historians often debate the real significance of Franklin's standardization efforts. Some say they were minor reforms. Others credit them with laying the groundwork for America's future municipal fire departments. Most agree that uniformity made the volunteer brigades far more effective and much less likely to shout at each other in front of a burning bakery. Meanwhile, Franklin's modest water carriage idea slowly improves. You help wheel version 2 around the block. This one includes a hand pump, a tighter seal, and room for a small bell on top. When the bell rings, children cheer and dogs bark. It's not very fast, but it feels official. Later, Franklin muses, imagine a day when every city has one of these in every neighborhood, waiting, watching. You nod, though you quietly wonder how far a leaky barrel with wheels can truly go. But he sees something you don't yet, the seed of infrastructure, the idea that prevention should be built into the bones of a city. And it begins with buckets. Not glory, not legislation, just The quiet agreement that a bucket should be shaped the same in every hand, and that water should flow easily between neighbors no matter what sash they wear. Back in the print shop, you help Franklin prepare a new broadside. He titles it How to Save a City with a Consistent Container. You suggest something shorter. He shrugs. It prints anyway. The sun sets as you finish organizing the hut. Buckets gleam, hoses coil neatly, and a new water carriage, version 3, is parked proudly out front. You leave a note tucked beneath its wheel. This one leaks less, mostly. As you walk home through lantern-lit streets, you notice how many houses now keep their own fire kits. Buckets by the door, ladders beside shutters, and all of it quietly, patiently matching. The city is still wooden, still flammable, but it's ready. You pass a bakery with 2 barrels by the window and a sign that reads standard size, standard pride. And you think for a moment that this humble sameness might be the most revolutionary thing of all. Evening rolls in with the familiar scent of burnt sugar and soot, the city's unofficial perfume. You're perched on the stoop of Franklin's print shop, nursing a cup of cider that's more steam than liquid. Inside, the press is still warm from a fresh run of pamphlets. This week's topic, fire etiquette, a gentleman's guide to not burning his neighbors. It's full of Franklin's particular charm, gently sarcastic, oddly specific, and illustrated with tiny woodcut flames that frown when candles are left unattended. You helped edit it. Well, you corrected Chimbley to chimney 17 times, close enough. Tonight's agenda, organizing a city-wide fire drill. Yes, a drill. The idea is met with a mix of enthusiasm and dramatic groans, but Franklin is persistent. Better to trip over a bucket now, he says, than over regret later. You suspect he just wants an excuse to test version 4 of his wheeled water barrel, which now features a horn. No one asked for the horn. The drill is scheduled for next Tuesday. You spend the days leading up to it running between firehouses, hanging notices on tavern doors, and convincing people not to bring their goats for realism. You manage to dissuade most of them. Most. The morning of the drill arrives with unusual quiet. It's as if the city itself is holding its breath. Volunteers line up in their sashes, buckets in hand, eyes half awake. A child plays with a spare nozzle like it's a trumpet. A shoemaker's apprentice naps on a pile of coiled rope. The rooster mascot is already arguing with a cat. The signal goes up 3 bells from the clock tower. Smoke pots are lit safely, simulating fire at designated practice buildings. The drill begins. You run with your brigade, bucket in hand, heart pounding, even though it's just pretend. There's yelling, splashing, laughter. Someone gets water in their boot and claims it's a personal attack, but the system works. Bucket lines form smoothly, hoses unfurl like trained snakes, ladders are raised in near unison. The mock fire is extinguished in under 6 minutes. The crowd cheers. One woman faints from excitement or possibly from corset circumstances. Either way, she's revived quickly with water and a half-eaten biscuit. Franklin arrives, triumphant and wheeling version 4, the horn now replaced with a small copper bell that rings every time the wheels turn. Much more dignified, he says, before nearly tipping the thing into a puddle. That afternoon, a citywide meal is hosted in the park. Stew, bread, cider, and celebratory pie. Each brigade is praised. Medals are awarded, one for most graceful bucket toss, another for least property damage, simulated. You receive a ribbon that reads reliable in a downpour. Historians still debate whether that fire drill was the first formal one in the colonies. Some argue Boston tried a version earlier, though without Franklin's flair, or his relentless pamphlet campaign. What's not debated is the effect. Fire preparedness became a civic virtue. People took pride in being ready. It became something to do, not just something to fear. The next day, a school teacher writes to Franklin asking for simplified fire safety guidelines for children. He smiles, and in less than an hour, you're printing Little Flame, Big Lesson, complete with rhymes like, if it's hot and red, don't poke it in bed. It's ridiculous. It's beloved. The kids chant it in the street for weeks. You begin to notice subtle changes around the city. More homes keep buckets by the door, chimneys are cleaned regularly, and most remarkably, people begin talking about fire safety not just when something burns, but before. That night, you help Franklin catalog feedback from the drill. He writes everything down: timing, strengths, where someone dropped a ladder on a constable's foot. Next time, he mutters, we'll try for 5 minutes. And you believe it, because now the city isn't just reacting, it's planning together. The air smells a little less like panic, a little more like preparation. As you close up the print shop, you glance at the leftover pamphlets, the soot-smeared bucket by the door, and the faint echo of bells still bouncing around the city's brick walls. You feel something unusual for a place made of wood and worry, reassurance. Maybe no city's ever truly safe, but with enough drills, enough laughter, and maybe one fewer goat next time, Philadelphia might just be getting there. The morning after the drill, you're limping, not from flames, but from enthusiasm. Fire readiness, it turns out, is surprisingly hard on the ankles. Franklin, on the other hand, is striding through the streets with a stack of new proposals tucked under one arm and a plum tart under the other. You suspect the tart is for bribery. He's headed to City Hall to push for something bolder, a fire watch system. Not just volunteers who react, but designated citizens who anticipate. You walk with him, because that's what you do now. Carry pamphlets, smooth feathers, and occasionally hold a ladder. As you enter the modest chambers of local government, the mood is already a little smoky. Less from fire, more from friction. A few councilmen yawn behind their powdered wigs. Others glare at Franklin like he's just asked them to fund a parade for bees, which, honestly, feels like something he might do next. They began, gentlemen, what if I told you fire could be caught before it started? Gasps, a dropped quill, one man chokes on his tea. Franklin loves it. He proposes a rotation. Each night, 2 citizens patrol a section of the city from dusk until dawn, looking for unattended lanterns, smoldering hearths, or suspicious smoke. Volunteers, of course, at first, paid, perhaps, eventually. The goal: catch fires early, sound the alarm, prevent catastrophe. The idea feels almost too modern. People blink. One man mutters, "But I sleep at night." Franklin nods. So do sparks. After much grumbling and the strategic deployment of the tart, shared at just the right moment, the council agrees to a test run. 1 month, 2 watches per night, 4 sectors of the city. You help draft the guidelines, which include polite instructions like try not to wake the baby unless the barn's ablaze. First night is quiet, too quiet, according to one watchman who insists a shadow looked very guilty. But by week's end, small but important incidents are logged. A tavern candle left burning, a laundry fire smothered before it spread, a roof ember brushed off with a broom, and a prayer. Historians still argue whether Franklin's fire watch was the first in America or merely the most methodically documented. Either way, it becomes habit. People sleep easier. Neighborhoods begin organizing their own rotations. A man named Gideon starts wearing a sash that says Watch Commander. Though no one gave him that title, He insists it helps morale. You join the patrol one night, lantern in hand, walking cobbled streets that glisten under a recent rain. You pass closed shutters, hear a fiddle in the distance, and once, briefly, make accidental eye contact with a raccoon. He blinks, unimpressed. At one corner, you find a hearth still glowing through a crack in the shutters. You knock gently. An old woman appears, scowling until she sees your sash. "Bah," she mutters, but the coals are doused. Later, Franklin scribbles furiously in his journal. What if every city had this? He wonders aloud. Not just fires, but all dangers, storms, thieves, epidemics. You smile. Maybe one thing at a time, Ben. Ben. Still, the idea takes root. Franklin publishes a treatise on civic preparedness, one chapter devoted entirely to the fire watch. Another includes an illustration of a man in a sash gently poking a candle with a long stick labeled extinguisher. IN. Word spreads. Other cities inquire. Boston requests a copy of the guidelines. Williamsburg sends a delegation. Suddenly, Franklin's fire watch is no longer an odd local experiment, it's a model. Back home, a group of children forms a junior watch and takes to miming nightly patrols. They carry empty buckets, invent badges, and chase stray cats with admirable sincerity. You quietly fund their snacks. And that's how it happens. Not with fanfare or official titles, but with people who simply start watching, caring, noticing. A city that learns to look up from its hearth, squint into the dark, and see not just danger, but opportunity. As dawn creeps over the rooftops, you hand off your lantern to the next pair and stretch your aching back. The air is cool, clean, smoke-free. Somewhere nearby, a rooster squawks indignantly, probably Gideon's. And once again, Philadelphia survived the night, not by chance, but by choice. The first real test comes on a windy Tuesday evening. You've just sat down to what could generously be called soup. Turnips trying their best to pretend they're interesting when a bell rings out from the south end of town. Not the usual tavern bell for last call. No, this is the alarm. You're already out the door with your coat half on and your shoes arguing with the mud. The sky is a strange shade of tangerine at the horizon. You see it before you smell it. The dark tongue of smoke licking up past the rooftops. Someone's chimney has misbehaved. Again. By the time you reach the scene, the fire brigade is already at work. Buckets are flying in the most orderly fashion possible. The newer leather hoses are hissing with impressive vigor. Someone's dog is enthusiastically barking at a water barrel, perhaps under the impression it started this whole thing. Franklin, naturally, is shouting cheerful encouragement while taking notes. His coat is backwards, probably in his rush to dress. "Ah," he mutters, watching sparks dance up into the wind. "She's a stubborn one." This blaze isn't huge, but it's tricky. It's lodged between two narrow homes made entirely of wishful thinking and dry timber. The team fans out, ladders rise, and the junior brigade arrives, mostly to be politely ushered away again after attempting to strategically roll marbles at the flames. But the real hero tonight? The fire watch. 2 volunteers spotted the early smoke, rang the bell, and kicked in a neighbor's door with the enthusiasm of men fueled by both adrenaline and slightly undercooked beef pies. Because of them, everyone was out of the buildings before the fire took hold. And because of the brigade, the fire is soon just a stubborn hiss and a few singed roof tiles. You help haul a final pail of water, the splash freezing almost instantly on your sleeves. The cold's creeping in hard now. Winter in Philadelphia is not known for its gentleness. You breathe out a cloud that vanishes into the dark. The cleanup begins. Wet rugs, scorched beams, neighbors passing around blankets in sympathy. Someone hands you a cup of cider with bits of ash floating in it. You drink it anyway. Franklin convenes a quick huddle. That, he says, was efficient and mildly terrifying, which is, I believe, the correct ratio. He proposes a new award, the Ember Alert Medal, to be given to watchmen who spot trouble before it becomes tragedy. You nominate the dog. Franklin surprisingly agrees. At night, you help document the event for the public read, a new idea Franklin's been working on. If we don't write it down, he says, they'll just remember the part where someone's wig caught on fire, which it did, briefly. He's fine. The report includes response times, actions taken, lessons learned, and 3 suggested recipes for soot-resistant stew, submitted anonymously. Historians still discussed this fire, not because it destroyed half the city, it didn't, but because it didn't. And that, as Franklin proudly notes in the Gazette, is the real headline. Preparedness, not luck, saves the day. You walk home late, past houses lit with soft lamplight, their hearths watched a little more closely now. You pass a boy on a stoop polishing a brass bucket like it's a medal. He waves. The city feels quieter tonight, but not in a fearful way. It's the quiet that comes after a lesson, not defeat, but adjustment. A realization that fire is part of life here, yes, but so too is response, community, readiness. Back at your place, you peel off your damp coat, set your boots by the hearth, and hang your bucket on the hook by the door. It drips once, slowly, steadily, like the ticking of a very old clock. Outside, the night deepens, and somewhere far away another bell rings. But not here. Not tonight. Morning arrives with less drama and more creaking joints. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and wince at a mysterious ache in your knee that definitely wasn't there yesterday. The fire's out. The reports are filed. And Franklin is already drafting a pamphlet titled How Not to Burn Down Your Block Again. It will include illustrations, possibly of goats. Today's task is less exciting but no less important, organizing the newly formalized Union Fire Company roster. Franklin, in his usual understated way, refers to it as a modest little civic marvel. You refer to it as a collection of names, addresses, handwriting styles, and questionable spellings. The roster lists everyone involved in fire response: bucket carriers, ladder holders, hose handlers, bell ringers, lantern minders, and that one guy whose only listed skill is shouting clearly under duress. Franklin gives him a gold star. He helped transcribe the pages with a worn quill and your best attempts at cursive. Names blur, occupations drift between candle makers, bakers, coopers, brewers, and one professional goat herder who insists that fire can smell fear you choose not to ask. But what's interesting, what really catches your sleepy attention, is how many of these people were once strangers, now they're teammates, friends even. There's Margaret, who bakes extra bread for the early watchmen. There's Elijah, who teaches younger recruits how to tie knots quickly. And there's old Silas, who brings a whistle carved from whalebone and says, "It worked at sea, why not here?" You smile, not just at the names, but at what they represent: a city learning how to work together, how to care preemptively. Beck Franklin stands behind you, munching an apple, clearly pleased. What we're building, he says, isn't just a fence, it's culture. You nod, though you'd be happier if the culture occasionally included naps. Later that week, the roster becomes official. Franklin prints it in the Pennsylvania Gazette, along with a short editorial extolling the virtues of organized cooperative responsibility and the extreme flammability of curtains. It's oddly poetic. Word spreads. Other cities send letters asking how it works. Charleston writes, "Must the buckets match?" New York asks, "Can we charge a fine for skipping drills?" Boston, in typical Boston fashion, already has a competing club that insists their buckets are faster. Franklin responds with a limerick. It's surprisingly biting. As more people join, the Union Fire Company expands, not just in size, but in scope. Someone suggests fire safety lessons for children. Someone else draws plans for a shared fire hall. A third proposes a newsletter titled The Ember Whisperer. That one doesn't catch on, but it does inspire a very enthusiastic poster of a smiling flame giving a thumbs up. You help design a rotating duty schedule. It's messy. There are complaints. Someone insists they can't do Tuesdays because of pickle obligations. Another won't work the northeast quadrant because the chickens there give him the stinker eye. You sigh, but somehow the system holds. At the next monthly meeting, Franklin unveils a surprising addition, a donation box. We cannot thrive on civic virtue alone, he explains, rattling the small wooden chest. We also require coin. There's laughter, but people toss in what they can. Coppers, buttons, even a polished stone from a child who believes it wards off fire spirits. It stays. Historians still debate whether this roster and donation system marked the true beginning of professionalized firefighting in America. Some argue it was still just enthusiastic volunteering. Others claim it was the moment civic duty grew muscles. Franklin, of course, just called it common sense. You attend another fire watch that week, quieter than the last. A few snuffed lanterns, a near miss with a pastry oven, but what you remember most is walking the same streets, lantern in hand, and hearing neighbors greet you, not with fear, but with familiarity, with trust. An old man on his stoop raises a mug and says, "You folks do good work." You smile, nod and reply, "We try not to burn out." Back at headquarters, such as it is, still mostly a shed with ambition, you hang the updated roster beside the door. It flutters in the breeze like a flag, a little wrinkled, a little ink-stained, but solid. The city, once fearful of flame, now watches itself. Not perfectly, not always promptly, but together. And that, you think, might be the rarest kind of safety. You start your day in the predictable way, bent over a small barrel, scrubbing soot out of your only decent coat. The fire may be out, the roster finalized, but the grime eternal. Every bucket lifted, every hose dragged through muddy streets, every enthusiastic splash has left its mark, mostly on your clothes, your boots, and your dignity. Today's meeting is a little different. Franklin's called it the civic improvement discussion, which you suspect means he has 5 ideas and wants to pretend they're yours. You arrive at the gathering inside a modest room above the print shop with chairs that creak like judgmental grandmothers, and find that Franklin's already sketched out a new concept on the wall. It's a circle with arrows and at least 2 suspiciously smug-looking stick figures labeled citizens who care. He clears his throat. What if, he begins, in that infuriatingly casual tone that means something mildly revolutionary is coming, we use what we've learned from the fire company to improve other things. Clean streets, better lighting, a watch system, shared tools. Someone raises a hand. So committees, frankly nods, exactly. Someone goes, but here's the thing, it's not a terrible idea. You sit through a surprisingly polite debate. One man suggests public waste removal. A woman across the room volunteers her son and his stubborn mule. Another suggests keeping wells clear of debris, which sparks an enthusiastic, if oddly emotional conversation about frogs. Soon a list forms on the wall under Franklin's drawing: street cleaning, well maintenance, nighttime patrols, and something ominously labeled lantern accountability. The fire company has inadvertently become the city's inspiration board. The success of the fire brigade wasn't just in its efficiency, but in its example. People saw what a group of loosely coordinated, moderately organized, occasionally bickering volunteers could accomplish, and they began to wonder, what else could be done? You're tasked with helping draft a civic compact. Franklin insists the title be friendlier. You suggest, let's all try slightly harder. He laughs, writes it down anyway. The compact outlines small daily actions that keep the city safer: sweeping stoops, trimming overhanging brush, clearing drains, storing wood piles properly. It's all incredibly dull, but also surprisingly satisfying. You write it in plain language, peppering in jokes where allowed. Franklin adds a poem. It rhymes. Badly. Soon, this unofficial manual circulates like wildfire. Ironically, people read it, share it, laugh at it, but mostly they follow it. Shops post parts of it in their windows, a tavern hangs it by the hearth. One creative soul sets it to music, though the chorus needs work. Historians will later call this an early example of grassroots urban planning. You, at the time, just call it everyone finally picking up after themselves. But Franklin, of course, takes it further. He proposes shared infrastructure, public tool sheds, regular lantern inspections, a communal broom for alleyways. Yes, really. The fire company begins to feel less like a club and more like a civic heartbeat. When something breaks, someone fixes it. When someone slips, someone helps them up. When the bakery's chimney belches smoke suspiciously sideways, 3 people are already poking at it with concern before the owner even notices. One evening, during patrol, you pass a group of children drawing pictures in the dirt. One of them has sketched a fireman with an enormous hat holding a hose like a sword. You point and raise an eyebrow. The child grins. "That's you," she says. You laugh. "My nose isn't that big." As she shrugs. "Maybe too far away." Far away or not, something has changed. Not just the systems, not just the protocols, but the city itself. It breathes differently now. It watches itself, corrects itself, not perfectly, but persistently. At night, you light your own lantern before bed, not because you're afraid, but because you know someone might walk by, see it flickering, and feel reassured. It's a small flame, but it's part of a larger glow. The fire company may have started with buckets and bells, but it's become something else entirely. A reminder that community isn't born from disaster, it's shaped by how we prepare for it. You settle into sleep with the faintest smell of smoke still clinging to your coat, and a very specific peace that only comes from knowing you helped make something just a little sturdier. Morning drapes itself over the city like a clean tablecloth, soft and slow, with that faint smell of fresh bread and yesterday's ash. You stretch, yawn, and immediately trip over a coil of hose someone forgot to hang. Again. The firehouse may be gaining fame, but its members still struggle with basic tidiness. Today's assignment is special. You're escorting a visiting delegation from New York. They've heard about the Union Fire Company and want to observe, inquire, and, let's be honest, probably borrow most of it. Franklin calls it civic flattery. You call it a chance to wear your slightly less soot-covered coat. Visitors arrive mid-morning, looking curious and mildly judgmental, as all New Yorkers do. One wears a powdered wig so wide it could shade a picnic. Another keeps consulting a pocket watch with theatrical frustration, as if trying to shame time itself. The third is a quiet man with ink-stained fingers who nods approvingly at everything but writes nothing down. You begin the tour with the basics: bucket racks, lantern storage, rope shelves labeled with names in smudged chalk. Someone tries to ask about water pressure. You explain that pressure is mostly provided by panic and shouting. They don't laugh. You pretend you were serious. Franklin arrives in his usual breezy way, holding a folded diagram of the station's layout and 2 apples. He offers one to the quiet delegate. "Good for digestion," he says. "Also, we've learned it's the only fruit that doesn't catch fire easily." The New Yorkers nod, Some impressed, some skeptical. One asks, "How often do you actually need to respond to a fire?" Franklin replies, "Less often than we used to," which is rather the point. He leads them to the drill yard where the team is running a training session. Buckets are passed, hoses drag. Someone drops a ladder. It lands with a clatter and a cheerful "still counts." The visitors take notes. At least one sketches the ladders are mid-fall. After the drill, the guests ask about funding. Franklin shrugs. Donations, occasional subscriptions, a few generous bakers, one very suspicious barrel of coins labeled "from anonymous." The quiet man finally speaks. "And no royal backing?" "None," Franklin says, just neighbors. Historians often mark this visit as a turning point, not for the Union Fire Company, which was already sturdy, but for the idea of organized public safety spreading through the colonies. It was proof that civic defense didn't require kings, just cooperation and a reasonable tolerance for splinters. Later, over a modest meal of stew and slightly charred biscuits, the delegates asked to copy your training guidelines. Franklin agrees, but insists they also take the joke section titled "Things You Shouldn't Try to Save from a Burning Building," including your ego. They glance at it, frown, then chuckle. Progress. The next morning, as they prepare to leave, one of the New Yorkers asks, "What if every city had one of these?" You smile, squint at the rising sun and say, "Then maybe fewer cities would have to rebuild every decade." It's not profound, but it lands. They depart with sheaves of notes, handshakes, and a very polite argument over who gets to carry the training manual. We return to the station where someone is attempting to build a new hose hanger out of an old fence post and a spoon. You decide to let them try. Innovation has its moments. In the following weeks, Franklin writes a short piece titled "On the Replicability of Civic Institutions." You read it, blink, and ask if it could maybe have a subtitle. He considers, then adds, or why it's not madness to expect fire safety from your neighbors. Letters begin to arrive. Baltimore, Charleston, even Boston, yes, them again, all curious about how to form their own brigades. Some ask for blueprints, others want your rules. A few just send vague compliments and drawings of heroic firemen standing under rays of sun, one of which features a hat so tall it must be a lighthouse. You realize what's happening. You're not just part of a team anymore, you're part of a movement. The quiet kind, the clay under fingernails, ash in your sleeves kind. Built not with speeches but with a rope and buckets and mornings like this one. You write your own little guide, short, practical, with room for smudges. You don't sign your name, you don't need to, because the flame's already moving. And for once, that's a good thing. A storm rolls through town during the night, leaving behind puddles, a half-tipped outhouse, and 3 very wet chickens looking betrayed. You step over one of them on your way to the station, your boots squelching as if the earth itself has caught a cold. Inside, the firehouse smells like damp rope and old leather, which is, admittedly, its usual scent, but today it's trying a little harder. The storm brought more than rain, it brought stories. A woman from the north end reports lightning striking a chimney. Miraculously, it held, barely. A tavern sign was torn off, flung through a bakery window and embedded in a loaf of rye. No injuries, just an extremely startled baker and an accidental new logo. These small disasters come with their own brand of relief. You get to test the system, and it works. The team assembles with less grumbling than usual. You organize a patrol to check on vulnerable spots. Old roofs, leaning walls, that one shop with too many lanterns and not enough shelves. Franklin joins you briefly, umbrella in hand, which he uses mostly as a pointer. You see, he says, this is why we plan, so we don't panic. You nod, although someone nearby is definitely panicking over a waterlogged map. As you walk the streets, you begin to notice something new. People watching from doorways, nodding, waving. One child hands you a soggy biscuit in thanks. You accept. It tastes like duty and raisins. Later at the main square, a crowd gathers. Not for an emergency, but for something rarer. A thank you. The city council has prepared a public acknowledgement. It is predictably long-winded and oddly focused on the council's own role in your success. But the applause, when it comes, is genuine. Franklin is asked to speak. He declines. The bucket speaks for itself, he says, patting the nearest one. It promptly tips over and rolls away. A metaphor, perhaps. Afterwards, you overhear townsfolk chatting about forming a neighborhood watch. One man suggests repainting the fire poles. A group of teenagers volunteers to help with lantern upkeep. You watch it unfold like the start of a dance. Awkward, spontaneous, but moving in the right direction. You return to the firehouse just before dusk, where the team is drying boots near the hearth and arguing about whose mop is actually theirs. You sit, listen, and let the warmth creep into your bones. This, you think, is what Franklin meant, not just extinguishing flames, but sparking something else, a kind of contagious care. You remember the early days, when your shoes stayed wet for hours, when instructions were more like polite guesses, when you weren't sure anyone would show up. But now, the schedule is full. The buckets are labeled, and most miraculously, the rookies know how to coil a hose without turning it into a rope pretzel. Historians still argue whether Franklin intended the fire company to become a model for democratic action, or if he just really hated watching houses burn down. Both seem true, maybe neither. But here you are, the storm passed, the streets swept, and the only thing left smoldering is a bit of pride in your chest. That night you fall asleep with a new sound in your ears. Not fire bells or shouts, but a low murmur outside your window. Someone is sweeping the street, not because they must, but because they saw you do it first. It's laundry day at the firehouse, which means the back courtyard is strung with ropes of damp uniforms flapping like reluctant flags. You duck beneath a pair of smoke-stained breeches as you carry a load of soot-tilocking gloves to the basin. Even heroes, it turns out, smell like wood smoke and damp wool when unwashed long enough. The town's quieter today, a kind of midweek lull that settles over the cobblestones like flour dust before a bake. You take advantage of the calm to reorganize supplies, ropes here, axes there, and the mystery shelf of unclaimed hats, which now boasts 13 varieties, including one that might be a wig. Franklin drops by, carrying a sack of apples and a pamphlet he's just printed. He waves it dramatically before handing you a copy. The title reads, "On the Utility of Modest Preparedness, Fire, Flour, and Fortitude." You flip through it. It's half practical advice, half charming meander. One page just says, "Put out the small fires before they become big ones." Applies to everything. You suggest that might make a good sign for the firehouse wall. He agrees. He's already carved it into a board. Apparently, in a fit of late-night inspiration and too much cider. That afternoon, a local teacher stops by with her class. She's hoping for a brief tour, but Franklin, spotting the opportunity, launches into a full lecture on the physics of chimney draft. The children pretend to listen. One boy pokes the bell rope repeatedly, which doesn't ring but does amuse the dog, who has taken to chasing its swinging end. Still, they leave with smiles and a better understanding of both smoke and sarcasm. You give each child a small paper handout, Franklin's idea again, titled "Fire Safety for the Young and Reasonably Clever." One girl asks if she can be a fire warden when she grows up. You tell her she already is, in spirit. You spend the next hour patching a leather water bucket whose bottom has gone from slightly leaky to fountainless. The repair is slow, meditative, stitch by stitch. You think about how many times this same bucket has passed through hands. Yours, Franklin's, the rookie who always forgets gloves, and how it's never the bucket alone that saves the day, but the chain of people behind it. That evening you gather around the fire with the crew. Someone brought gingerbread, someone else brought gossip. The combination is ideal. The mood turns reflective. One of the older members talks about the fire that took half his neighbor's block before the brigade existed. Another admits he first joined to impress someone who promptly moved to Boston. Everyone nods in sympathy. You realize something unspoken is shifting. It's not just about reacting to danger now, it's about shaping the city to resist it. Prevention as pride, readiness as ritual. The company isn't just a group of volunteers, it's becoming part of the civic rhythm. Franklin says something quietly then, almost to himself. A safe city makes space for better ideas. He doesn't elaborate, he doesn't need to. Later, when the others have gone, you hang the new sign on the firehouse wall. Put out the small fires before they become big ones. The letters are a bit crooked, the nail wobbles, but it holds. Outside, the laundry has dried. You unpin a pair of trousers, stiff with starch and sunlight. You fold them carefully, like they matter, because now they do. The next morning smells like ash and fresh ink. You roll up the firehouse shutters and blink into the pale light, only to find Franklin already seated on the stoop, nibbling a pear and writing on the back of a biscuit wrapper. Some of my best ideas, he says between bites, come from unlikely surfaces. You're preparing for something Franklin calls a community preparedness day, though most of the firehouse suspects it's just an excuse for him to test a new folding ladder prototype. He claims it can be carried under one arm. Early tests suggest it can also pinch very effectively. Still, word has gotten around. People from all over the city have been invited. Carpenters, bakers, midwives, tanners, and more than a few curious children who show up mostly for the chance to wear a helmet and bang the practice bell. You arrange the yard like a sleepy carnival. One table shows how to safely store candles, not next to hay. Another displays rope coiling demonstrations. Franklin has set up a mini maze with small fake fires made of red cloth and a mechanism that flaps them gently. You're still not sure why he calls it the Blazing Education Fun Zone. As the crowd trickles in, you hear murmurs of appreciation and confusion. One merchant squints at a bucket labeled Ash Only and asks if that's a new brand of tea. A blacksmith compliments the hose system, then suggests a way to make the nozzles more efficient using scrap horseshoe nails. You thank him and make a note to ask someone more practical whether that's genius or disaster. Children run mock drills with tiny buckets. A volunteer juggles flaming torches in a roped-off area until Franklin politely suggests he consider juggling apples instead. The man nods solemnly and drops a torch on his own foot. There's laughter, learning, and of course Franklin's impromptu lecture on the psychology of panic and the merits of calm water, delivered with dramatic pauses and an unnecessary puppet. By mid-afternoon, the yard is alive with a comfortable chaos. A baker donates pastries. A printer offers to publish your fire safety guide. Someone donates an actual bell to replace the cracked one you've been using, and everyone gathers around for a moment of overly enthusiastic ringing. Historians still argue whether this day marks the true beginning of organized fire education in the colonies or if it was simply a cleverly disguised town fair. But either way, the records show something changed. More houses stored water near their hearths. More families taught their children how to safely exit during a blaze. Someone even wrote a short song about stopping, dropping, and rolling, though it had an awkward rhyme involving soup. As the evening falls, the visitors linger. A cobbler helps patch a worn boot. A glass blower sketches an idea for a flame-proof window. You sip cider and realize the city isn't just safer, it's engaged. Franklin leans against the fence beside you, smudged with soot and crumbs. The most valuable invention, he says, might be interest. Interest in one another. The interest in what we build. He doesn't mention the folding ladder once. You suspect it collapsed again. When the sun finally dips behind the rooftops, the crowd begins to leave. Slowly, kindly, like people returning from a meal instead of a meeting. You tidy up with the crew, the hose gets rewound, the bell is polished, and the bucket of lost mittens grows by 2. As you wash your hands at the pump, you glance back at the firehouse. For the first time, it doesn't look like a place that simply waits for disaster. It looks like the heart of something steady. You dry your hands, you breathe in the cool air, and you smile. Not because the job is done, but because tomorrow it will begin again. You wake before the rooster. You're not out of duty, just habit now. The morning is quiet, the kind of quiet that presses gently against your eardrums until you remember how rare it used to be. No shouting, no fire bells, just the creak of floorboards and the sigh of wind slipping past shutters. Downstairs, the firehouse is still. A few boots are neatly lined up. A mop leans too confidently in a corner. On the wall, Franklin's crooked sign still hangs. Put out the small fires before they become big ones. You run your fingers across the letters. They've begun to wear smooth from touch. That feels right. Outside, the city stretches into the day. Chimneys puff gentle ribbons of smoke. The bakery cart rolls down the street with a lopsided wheel and the same creaky optimism. Even the goats seem less chaotic. It's peaceful, but not sleepy. Not anymore. You stop by the usual breakfast vendor and accept a bowl of hot grain mash with a generous helping of preserved plums. The vendor nods knowingly. Saw your young ones running drills yesterday, she says. Didn't spill a drop. You blink. You didn't know she'd been watching. Back at the firehouse, you meet with a few of the newer volunteers. One is a teenager who joined because her older brother wouldn't let her use the bucket. She's better at knots than anyone. Another is a quiet man who says little, but polishes brass until it gleams like a lighthouse. You've started keeping notes now. Not reports, just observations, like Gideon folds the hoses like he's tucking in a child, or Esther can carry 2 buckets at once without sloshing. It's not official, but it helps. You're learning that leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just noticing. Franklin arrives late, coat unbuttoned, scarf trailing like he lost a duel with a laundry line. He's carrying a new invention, a waterproof fire log. For when the flames are metaphorical, he grins. You don't ask. Instead, you help him tack a new sheet onto the bulletin board. Open house this Sunday. Bring your questions. Leave your candles unattended at home. It's a joke. Probably. You spend the afternoon repairing the shed. Someone has finally gotten around to replacing the broken latch. Someone who may or may not understand latches. The result resembles a puzzle box built by a bored philosopher. It takes 3 people and an accidental elbow to get it open. Inside, everything smells like oil, rope, and mild disappointment. You air it out. As you tidy, you find a crate of old helmets, not worn in years. You place them on a shelf. Anyway, something about their shape, the dents, the soot stains, feels worth keeping. Memory, you think, isn't always for accuracy. Sometimes it's just for presence. Late in the day, the wind picks up. A storm, maybe. The crew double-checks windows, secures tools, and tests the bell, which now rings with a kind of dignified clang. There's no panic, just motion, rehearsed, calm, and oddly graceful. Historians still argue whether Franklin's fire company really transformed the city or if it was simply the right idea at the right moment. But walking through the firehouse now, you suspect it wasn't the idea or the moment, it was the people. The fact that enough of them decided to care together, and often, as dusk descends, you sit on the steps with Franklin sharing a mug of something warm and spiced. He's quieter now, thoughtful. You know, he says, fire's a peculiar thing. It destroys, it illuminates, and sometimes it just warms. You know, the mug is nearly empty. The sky is nearly dark. But the light inside glows steady. And outside, the city breathes easy. You open the logbook, the old one bound in cracked leather and soot-streaked from years of desk duty. The pages are uneven, written in a dozen hands over the years, each entry a little snapshot of the ordinary moments that kept the whole thing running. You flip past the early days, the lists of who forgot what, who fetched water fastest, who fainted at the smell of singed laundry, and find yourself in the middle, where Franklin's handwriting pops up in between others like a goose among hens. The populace, the Cromwells, who were the others. One entry just says, bell rang, cat not fire, still a valuable drill. Another describes a hose that burst mid-pump and sprayed an entire congregation on their way to Sunday service. You smile. You were there, you still remember the minister's calm acceptance. We are but steam, he'd murmured. Outside the rain begins, gentle, polite. The kind of drizzle that makes streets shimmer but doesn't quite soak your socks. You step out under the firehouse eave, watching the drops patter into buckets lined up to catch the runoff. Water, enemy and ally. You see one of the newer recruits jog across the square, holding a wide hat over her head like a portable roof. She waves, you wave back. The whole city feels a little smaller now. Not because it's changed, but because you've noticed more of it. Bina Franklin passes you on the steps, humming some half-forgotten tune about candlelight and teacups. He's balancing a tray with 2 mugs of something warm and probably too strong. You accept yours. It's terrible. You sip it anyway. A letter came in today from another colony. Someone asking how to start their own company. They'd heard of Philadelphia's brigade, of Franklin, of you. The idea has traveled farther than you ever expected. Carried not by smoke or flame, but by story. That's the thing, you realize fires go out, but the memory of people showing up to stop them, that endures. You sit down at the desk, still holding your mug, and begin writing a reply. You keep it simple. Start with buckets. Add neighbors. Stir gently. You think Franklin would approve? The rain continues, steady now. The firehouse settles in around you, boots by the door, gloves drying on hooks, the slow creak of beams expanding in the damp. There's talk of building a second station on the east side of the city. A few merchants have offered space. A blacksmith wants to donate a bell. A potter suggests clay water jars shaped like lions. You suspect it's a branding thing. You don't mind. It means they care. You finish your letter and seal it with wax, using the old stamp shaped like a lantern. The wax drips crookedly. That feels just right. In the corner, someone's reading aloud from Poor Richard's almanac. You catch a phrase, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It lands softly, like it's been waiting for the right moment to be heard. You close the logbook and return it to its shelf. The fire crackles in the hearth. Outside, the bell tower gleams faintly under the lanterns, its metal rim collecting drops of rain like a song in slow motion. And somewhere in the distance, far past the alleyways and rooftops, another bell rings. Faint, curious. Maybe another brigade, maybe just the wind. You listen, you wait. But no alarm follows, just the soft hush of a city that knows someone is always watching the flank. The rain lets up sometime after midnight, though the rooftops still glisten and the gutters chatter with leftover runoff. You're still awake, not because you need to be, but because you want to be. The firehouse is never quite silent. It murmurs with wood settling, coals sighing in the stove, and the faint rustle of someone adjusting their blanket in the bunk room upstairs. You sit alone in the main hall, your chair tilted back, watching shadows dance along the ceiling beams. There's a comfort in these quiet hours, the kind that only exists in places built for noise but currently resting. You glance at the bell. It hasn't moved all night. It almost looks shy, as if it knows it deserves the sleep too. Franklin snores gently from the office where he fell asleep mid-scribble. His quill is still resting in the crook of a sentence that probably ends with a pun about firewood and responsibility. You drape a blanket over his shoulders and let him be. He's earned the nap, the warmth, the whole strange legacy. You wander over to the window. Philadelphia is rusting too. Oil lamps flicker in a few upper windows, and a stray cat navigates the eaves like a furry philosopher. A constable walks by, nods at the firehouse, and disappears into the drizzle-softened dark. You think about how different the city feels now. Still flammable, still stubborn, but also somehow stitched together by a long, unspoken promise that someone, somewhere, is ready to help. You've learned things here, not just how to haul a hose or spot the signs of a chimney about to misbehave, but how people show up when it matters. How fire is only half the story, and the other half is what people build between the fires. You run a hand across the back of a worn bench and remember how it once cracked under the weight of wet gear and laughter. That was the night someone brought soup and accidentally ignited a wooden spoon. You still don't know how. Historians still argue whether Franklin truly invented America's first fire department or if he simply formalized what communities were already doing, whether he was a genius or just a very organized gossiper with a printing press. You've stopped caring because the truth, like smoke, tends to drift. But the warmth remains. Outside, dawn begins, slow, golden, and entirely unhurried. The kind of sunrise that tiptoes up the street and peeks through windows before knocking. You light a small lantern anyway, out of habit. Its glow bounces against the walls and warms the corners. Nothing urgent, just a whisper of readiness. In the kitchen, someone stirs. A match is struck, a kettle is filled, and before long the scent of something roasted and hopeful fills the air. Another day, another chance to beat back the dark, not with bravado, but with buckets and common sense. You sit down with your crew, some still yawning, others already stretching. Franklin arrives with messy hair and a toast crumb on his eyebrow. No one says a word. You all just grin. Because here, among soot and scrapes and half-mended boots, you've helped make something that lasts. Not just a station, but a steadiness, a quiet kind of safety. And somewhere years from now, someone else might lean against a different firehouse wall, tracing the names on an old helmet or flipping through a tattered logbook, wondering how it all began. Began here, with neighbors, with water, with a stubborn printer and a city of wooden houses. With you. And it continues. Nice a story settles, so should you. Let your breath slow, your shoulders soften, your eyelids follow the rhythm of this quiet ending. Picture the firehouse in the earliest light of morning, dim, steady, and safe. Picture the last puff of smoke rising from the hearth, curling lazily into air that holds no threat, only calm. Outside, the streets are quiet again, not because they've never burned, but because they've been watched, tended, protected by hands both tired and willing. A bell that once rang now rests. A bucket that once splashed now waits, dry and ready. Let the sounds of distant rain and the imagined creak of a wooden floor carry you deeper into stillness. The kind of stillness that comes not from silence alone, but from knowing the flame is cared for. Somewhere in the back of your mind, the bell tower stands watch, not to startle you awake, but to remind you that even in the darkest hours, there is structure, there is care, there is time. We have done enough for today. So let the glow fade, let the warmth hold, let your thoughts drift like ash rising harmlessly into a dark and quiet sky. Sleep well, firekeeper.